They told her she'd be torn apart in minutes. Leora Vale, a refugee Omega with scarred hands and hollow eyes, stood at the iron gate of Blackridge's royal nursery, where 5 untamed alpha cubs waited like loaded weapons. The council wanted proof she'd fail. The guards bet on how fast she'd bleed. But when the gate clanged open and the smallest cub charged with teeth bared, Leora did something no one expected. She smiled. Not the soft, submissive kind they'd seen from broken Omegas. This was different, dangerous. And in that moment, the entire pack hierarchy began to crack. Stay until the end to see how one defiant choice rewrites an empire. Drop a comment with your city. I want to know where you're watching from. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button. Let's go. The air in Blackridge territory smelled like rust and rain. Leora Vale had been smelling it for 3 days now, ever since the patrol dragged her across the border with a gash on her temple and nothing but the clothes she wore. She wasn't supposed to be here. Outsiders rarely survived the crossing, and Omegas never made it past the first interrogation, but something about her had made them pause. Maybe it was the way she didn't beg. Maybe it was the burn scar that wrapped around her left forearm like a brand, raised and angry, the kind of mark that told a story she never spoke aloud. Or maybe it was just boredom. Either way, they hadn't killed her. They'd given her a test instead. Now she stood in the center of the training arena, a circular pit ringed by stone benches and iron posts, staring at a door she couldn't see through. The metal was black, reinforced with bands of steel, and it had scratches running down the front, deep gouges that looked like they'd been made by claws. Somewhere behind it, 5 royal cubs waited. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. These weren't ordinary children. They were Varric blood, alpha spawn bred from the strongest lines in the northern territories. Volatile. Feral. Already showing dominance patterns that made grown warriors nervous. The council sat above her in a crescent formation, their faces carved from the same cold stone as the walls. 12 alphas. 11 men, 1 woman, all of them watching her like she was an experiment about to go wrong. "This is absurd," one of them muttered. His name was Tarek, a broad-shouldered enforcer with a scar splitting his lip and eyes that had seen too many battles to bother with mercy. "She won't last 5 minutes. 4, another corrected. A younger alpha, lean and sharp-eyed, with the kind of smirk that came from never losing. The little one goes for the throat. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Not cruel exactly, just factual. They'd seen this before. Omegas brought in to soothe the cubs, thinking gentleness would win them over. It never did. The royal nursery had gone through 6 attendants in 2 months. 3 quit. 2 were hospitalized. 1 just disappeared. Some said she ran. Others whispered she'd been buried in the northern woods where the snow never melted. Leora didn't look up at them. She kept her eyes on the door. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but she'd learned a long time ago how to keep her face blank, how to breathe through fear until it became something manageable. She'd had plenty of practice. 3 years on the run, 4 different territories, more close calls than she could count. This was just another one. Except it wasn't. This time, there was no running. "Whenever you're ready, girl," Tarek called down. His voice echoed off the stone, bouncing back at her from every direction. "Or you can walk now. No shame in it." There was, though. She could hear it in the way he said girl instead of her name, in the way the woman on the far left, Counselor Marin, silver-haired and sharp as a blade, hadn't spoken a single word since Leora entered the arena, just watched, measured, decided she wasn't worth the breath. Leora rolled her shoulders. Her ribs still ached from the road. Her boots were 2 sizes too big, scavenged from a dead man's pack 3 weeks ago when she'd stumbled on a massacre site near the eastern ridges. She had no weapons, no status, no leverage, just instinct. An instinct had kept her alive this long. She raised her hand, the signal. From somewhere deep in the corridor beyond the door, a low growl answered. Then the door opened. The first thing that hit her was the smell, wild and sharp, like fur and earth, and something metallic she didn't want to name. Then the sound. Not barking, not howling. Something between a snarl and a shriek, high-pitched and raw, the kind of noise that made every nerve in her body scream, "Run!" She didn't run. 5 shapes exploded into the arena. They were small, none taller than her waist, but they moved like storm fronts, chaotic, relentless. The largest led the pack, A gray-furred cub with gold eyes and a ridge of raised fur along his spine that made him look twice his size. Behind him came two others, nearly identical, their coats a mottled brown that shifted between shadow and light depending on how they moved. Then a sleek black one, hanging back but watching everything with eyes that tracked movement the way a hawk tracked prey. And last, the smallest, white-furred, with pale blue eyes and a limp in his left hind leg that made every step look like it hurt. The gray one stopped 10 feet from her. His lips pulled back, showing teeth too sharp for his age. Baby teeth, maybe, but they'd still tear flesh if given the chance. The others fanned out, circling her with a coordination that shouldn't have been possible for cubs this young. Leora didn't move. "Stand down," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, calm, the kind of tone you'd use with a spooked horse, not a pack of predators bred to kill. The gray cub lunged. He didn't go for her throat. He went low, aiming for her knee, and she twisted just enough to avoid the bite. His jaws snapped shut on air with a sound like a trap closing. He skidded past her, claws scraping stone, and whipped around for another pass. The two brown cubs darted in from the sides. Leora dropped into a crouch. It wasn't submission, it was positioning. She made herself smaller, less of a target, and when the cub on her left leaped, she caught him midair, not by the scruff, not rough, just firm, and set him down behind her. He yelped in surprise, scrambling to regain his footing, his claws clicking against the stone. The other one froze, confused by the lack of violence. The gray cub charged again. This time, Leora didn't dodge. She planted her feet and met him head-on, catching his momentum with her forearm. He bit down, hard, on the thick fabric of her sleeve, thrashing his head to tear through. She felt his teeth scrape the burn scar underneath, felt the pressure but not the break. And Leora laughed. It wasn't loud, barely more than a breath, but the sound cut through the arena like a bell. The cub stopped thrashing. She pulled her arm back, not yanking, not violent, just resistance. A tug, the kind you'd use in a game of tug-of-war with a dog that didn't know it was playing yet. The cub growled, but he didn't let go. She pulled again. Harder this time. His growl shifted, lower, almost playful. And then she yanked. He came with her, tumbling forward, and she twisted sideways so he landed in a heap of fur and limbs. Before he could recover, she tapped his flank, 2 quick pats the way you'd tag someone in a game, and stepped back. "Your turn," she said. The cub blinked. Then he lunged again. But this time there was no killing intent, just energy, just movement, just a cub who'd been locked in a nursery with nothing to do but fight and sleep and wait for someone to understand him. One of the brown cubs yipped and joined in. Then the other. The black one watched from the edge, tail low, uncertain, but his eyes tracked every move, cataloging, learning, and the smallest, the white one, sat perfectly still, staring at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Leora knelt. She didn't reach for him, didn't call him over, just knelt and waited, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing even. The gray cub crashed into her side, nearly knocking her over. She caught herself with one hand, laughing again, louder this time, and shoved him back. Not hard, just enough to make it interesting. He yipped, a sound of pure joy, and crashed into her again. The others piled on. And for the first time in 3 days, maybe the first time in 3 years, Leora forgot where she was. She forgot the council watching, forgot the iron walls, forgot the fact that she had no home, no pack, no future beyond this moment. She just played. She rolled with them when they tackled her, let them pin her down, and then wriggled free, laughing when they yipped in frustration. She grabbed the gray one's tail, gently, and he spun around, snapping at her hand, but there was no real aggression in it. Just play. Just the desperate, chaotic energy of children who'd never been allowed to be children. One of the brown cubs found her bootlace and started chewing. She let him. The other one climbed onto her back, digging his claws into her coat. Not deep enough to hurt, just enough to hold on. And she stood up slowly, carefully, giving him a ride around the arena while he chittered in what might have been laughter. The black cub finally approached, cautious, and when she extended her hand, he sniffed it for a long moment before pressing his nose against her palm. "There you are," she murmured. His tail lifted, just a fraction, but it was enough. And the smallest one, the white cub with the limp, finally moved. He approached slowly, dragging his bad leg, his eyes never leaving her face. When he was close enough, he sat, waited. Leora didn't move, didn't speak. The cub leaned forward and sniffed her knee, then her hand. Then, very carefully, he climbed into her lap. He was lighter than she expected, fragile, almost. She could feel his ribs under the fur, feel the uneven rhythm of his breathing. She touched his head gently, scratching behind his ears, and he leaned into the touch with a low rumble that vibrated through his entire body. "You're stronger than they think," she whispered. The cub's ears flicked. "I know what it's like," she continued, her voice barely audible, "being the smallest, being the one everyone underestimates. It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you have to be smarter." The cub's eyes closed halfway, his body relaxing against her. Around them, the other cubs had started to settle. The gray one flopped onto the stone with a dramatic huff, his tongue lolling out. The brown cub sprawled nearby, still chewing on her bootlace and coat hem. The black one sat just outside the circle, but his posture had shifted, less guarded, more curious. Leora looked up at the council gallery for the first time since the door had opened. They were all staring. But above the arena, the council sat in silence. Tarek's smirk had vanished. His mouth was open slightly, like he'd been about to say something and forgot the words. Marin leaned forward, fingers steepled, eyes narrowed in a way that made her look like she was dissecting what she'd just witnessed and reassembling it into something that made sense. Several of the other counselors were whispering to each other, their voices low and urgent. And at the far end of the crescent, in a seat carved from black stone and draped in wolf pelts, sat Ronan Varric, Alpha King of Blackridge, warlord of the Northern Packs, a man built like a siege weapon, all broad shoulders and brutal efficiency, with scars that told stories he never spoke aloud. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples. His eyes were the color of winter, pale gray, cold, and unreadable. He hadn't moved since the cubs entered the arena. Now, he stood. The entire gallery went quiet. The whispers stopped. The counselors turned to look at him. Even Tarek straightened in his seat, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been moments before. Ronan descended the stone steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. He didn't look at the council, didn't acknowledge their confusion or their questions. He stopped at the edge of the arena, hands braced on the iron railing, and watched. Below, Leora had the smallest cub in her lap, the white one. He'd finally approached, limping, cautious, and she'd let him sniff her hand before gently scratching behind his ears. He leaned into the touch, eyes half closed, a low rumble vibrating through his chest that Ronan could hear even from up here. The others were sprawled around her in various states of exhaustion. The gray one had his head on her knee. One of the brown cubs was still chewing on her bootlace with single-minded determination. The black one sat just outside the circle, but his tail twitched every time she spoke. She was talking to them. Not commands, not discipline, just talking. "You're faster than you think," she murmured to the white cub, her hand moving in slow, rhythmic strokes along his spine. "That leg doesn't slow you down as much as you believe it does. You just have to trust it." The cub's ears flicked forward, like he was listening. She smiled. "I know. Trusting broken things is hard, but broken doesn't mean useless. Sometimes it just means you've survived something that should have killed you, and that makes you dangerous in ways the whole ones will never understand." Ronan's jaw tightened. He'd seen warriors try to tame these cubs, seen handlers use chains, muzzles, dominance displays that left the cubs more traumatized than trained. Seen them fail, one after another, because they treated the cubs like threats instead of children, like weapons to be controlled instead of lives to be shaped. This woman, this stranger, this Omega, had walked in unarmed and turned a bloodbath into a game. No, not a game. Something deeper. She'd given them something they'd never had before. Permission to be vulnerable. "Who is she?" Ronan asked, his voice low enough that only the person nearest him would hear. Tarek appeared at his shoulder, slightly out of breath from the climb down the steps. He was a big man, but Ronan still had 4 inches and 50 pounds on him. "Refugee. Came across the Western Ridge 3 days ago. No pack markers, no history we can trace. She asked for asylum. And you put her in the arena." It wasn't a question. Tarek hesitated. "She volunteered, sir. We offered her a choice. Work detail in the mines, or prove she could handle the cubs. She chose this." Ronan's eyes didn't leave the woman below. What's her designation? Omega. Of course she was. Ronan had known the moment he saw her move, the way she made herself smaller, the way she used touch instead of force, the way she understood instinctively that dominance wasn't the answer here. Omegas weren't common in Blackridge. The territory was too harsh, too brutal, and most packs saw them as liabilities. Weaknesses to be protected or exploited, depending on the alpha in charge. Ronan had tried to change that, had issued decrees, restructured laws, built systems that were supposed to value all designations equally, but laws didn't change hearts. And the council still looked at Omegas like they were breakable things. Name? Ronan asked. Liora Vale. Ronan tested the name silently. It didn't fit her. Too soft. Too delicate. The woman in the arena wasn't delicate. She was scarred and lean and had the kind of eyes that had seen too much too young, eyes that looked like his, if he was being honest, the kind you got when survival stopped being a choice and became a reflex. He watched her stand slowly, carefully shifting the white cub off her lap. The cub whined softly but let her go, settling onto the stone with his head on his paws. She stretched, wincing slightly, ribs, probably, and looked around at the cubs like she was memorizing them. Get her out, Ronan said. Tarek blinked. Sir? Get her out of the arena, now, before they shift. Understanding dawned on Tarek's face, followed quickly by alarm. They're too young to— They're Varric blood, Ronan cut in, his voice hard. And the moon's 2 days from full. If even one of them shifts early, she's dead. And I'm not explaining to the northern clans why we let a refugee Omega get torn apart in our own arena. Tarek's face went pale. He turned and shouted down into the pit, his voice echoing off the stone. Vale, time's up. Exit now. Leora looked up, startled. The cub stirred, sensing the change in energy. The gray one lifted his head. The brown cubs stopped their chewing. The black one's ears swiveled toward the sound of Tarek's voice. She rose slowly, carefully, making sure not to spook them. The smallest one whined, pawing at her leg with his good front paw. She crouched and touched his nose gently, the way you'd seal a promise. I'll come back, she said quietly. The cub didn't look convinced. His ears drooped. She stood and walked toward the exit gate, each step deliberate. The gray cub followed for a few steps, then stopped, watching her go with an expression that looked almost like betrayal. The others clustered together, confused and restless, their brief moment of peace already slipping away. The gate clanged shut behind her with a sound like a cell door closing. Leora stood in the corridor, breathing hard, her sleeves shredded and her hand shaking from the adrenaline crash. She could feel the phantom weight of the smallest cub in her lap, could still hear the sound of their playing, and for a moment she thought she might cry. She didn't. She'd done it. She'd survived. A guard appeared beside her, a younger man with nervous eyes and a hand that kept drifting toward the blade at his hip, like he wasn't sure if he'd need it. Counselor Tarek wants you in the hall. Now. She nodded and followed, her boots echoing on the stone floor. Behind them, through the closed gate, one of the cubs howled. The council chamber was smaller than she'd expected. Stone walls, a long table made from a single piece of dark wood that looked like it had been there for centuries. No windows. The only light came from oil lamps mounted on the walls, casting shadows that made everyone look harsh and angular. Ronan sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. The rest of the council filled the seats along the sides, their expressions ranging from skeptical to outright hostile. Marin sat at Ronan's right, her silver hair braided tight against her skull, her gaze clinical. She looked at Leora the way a scholar might look at a specimen, curious, but not convinced. Leora stood at the far end of the table. No chair offered, no water, just her and 12 alphas staring her down like she was on trial, which she supposed she was. Tarek spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd already made up his mind. You survived. Congratulations. That doesn't mean we're keeping you. Agreed, another counselor said. A woman with a scarred throat and a voice like gravel scraped over stone. She got lucky. The cubs were tired. They weren't tired, Marin said quietly. All eyes turned to her. She didn't look away from Leora. I've watched those cubs for 2 months, every day, every interaction. They've never been tired, not once. They've been restrained, drugged, locked down, and beaten into submission by handlers twice their size, and they've never stopped fighting. The room went very still. Marin continued, her voice calm and precise. She didn't control them. She didn't dominate them. She didn't even try. And that's precisely why it worked. That's insane, Tarek said flatly. We can't build a pack on games and soft touches. These are royal cubs, future alphas. They need discipline, structure, strength. No, Marin said, and there was an edge to her voice now. They need balance, and balance requires more than just strength. Since when do Omegas understand balance? Another counselor asked, sneering slightly. They're built to submit, to nurture, not to lead. I'm not asking her to lead, Marin replied. I'm asking her to teach. Teach what? Tarek demanded. How to roll over, how to play nice. These cubs are going to rule packs someday. They'll have enemies, rivals, challengers who want them dead. You think playing games in an arena is going to prepare them for that? No, Ronan said. Everyone went quiet. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, and looked at Tarek. Games won't prepare them, but neither will fear. We've tried your way, Tarek. 6 handlers, all failures. The cubs are more aggressive now than when we started, more isolated, more unstable. Tarek's jaw worked. Then what do you suggest? Ronan's gaze shifted to Leora. She met it head on, even though every instinct told her to look away. You have a choice, Ronan said, his voice even. Leave Blackridge now with supplies and safe passage, or stay and take responsibility for the cubs, permanently. Leora's breath caught. Permanently? You'll raise them, train them, prepare them for their roles. And if they fail, if even one of them loses control and harms someone, you'll answer for it. The room erupted. This is madness, someone shouted. She's an outsider, an Omega. She has no training, no credentials. Enough! Ronan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The room went silent again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked at Leora. What's your answer? She swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry. That's not fair. Ronan's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Not quite kind. No, it's not. And if I refuse? Then you leave. Tonight. We'll give you a pack, supplies, enough to get you to the next territory. But you don't come back. She looked around the table, saw the doubt, the skepticism, the certainty that she'd fail, that this was just a formality before they sent her away. And she thought about the smallest cub, the white one with the limp and the 2 careful eyes, the one who'd finally trusted her enough to sit in her lap. She thought about what would happen to him if she left. Another handler, more chains, more fear, more breaking. What happens to them if I say no? She asked. Ronan didn't blink. We keep trying. Eventually we'll find someone who can handle them. Or we put them down. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Leora's hands clenched into fists. You'd kill them? If they become a danger to the pack, yes. Ronan's voice was flat, factual. That's the law. Uncontrolled alphas are a threat to everyone. And these cubs are already showing signs that they can't be managed. Because you're managing them wrong, Leora said, before she could stop herself. The room went deadly quiet. Tarek leaned forward, his eyes dangerous. Careful, girl. My name is Leora. Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. And I'm not wrong. You're treating them like weapons, like things, but they're children. They're predators, Tarek shot back. They're both. She looked at Ronan. You want me to raise them? Fine, but I do it my way. No chains, no cages, no handlers standing over them with whips and muzzles. They've hurt people, Marin said quietly. Because people have hurt them first, Leora replied. She took a breath. I'll take responsibility. If they fail, I fail. But you have to let me try. Ronan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Done. Tarek started to protest, but Ronan silenced him with a look. You'll have quarters in the East Wing, Ronan continued. Near the nursery. Report there at dawn. Someone will show you the rules. What if I break them? Leora asked. This time Ronan did smile, and it was not kind. Then you'll learn why we have them. What? That night, Leora lay on a cot in a room barely big enough to turn around in. The walls were stone, rough and cold. The window was a slit that let in wind and nothing else. She had a blanket that smelled like mildew and a pillow that was more rock than fabric. She didn't sleep. She kept thinking about the smallest cub, about the way he'd looked at her when she said she'd come back, like he'd heard promises before and knew they were lies. She'd made a promise, and for the first time in a long time, she intended to keep it. Outside, the wind howled through Black Ridge like a living thing, carrying with it the scent of snow and pine and something wild. And somewhere deep in the royal nursery, 5 cubs slept fitfully, dreaming of teeth and stone and a woman who'd smiled when she should have run. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, Leora stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life, or the last one. Dawn came too early. Leora woke to the sound of boots in the hallway, heavy, deliberate, and sat up before her mind fully caught up with her body. The room was still dark. The slit window showed nothing but gray sky and the promise of snow. Someone knocked. 3 sharp raps that weren't a request. She opened the door to find a woman in her 40s, built like she'd spent her life breaking things and putting them back together wrong. Her hair was pulled into a braid so tight it looked painful. Her eyes were the color of wet slate. "I'm Kara," the woman said. No greeting, no smile. "Head handler, you're with me." Leora stepped into the hallway, still pulling on the coat they'd given her the night before. It smelled like someone else and fit badly across the shoulders. "What time is it?" "Early enough that the cubs are still asleep. That won't last." Kara started walking without checking if Leora followed. "You've got an hour to learn the rules. After that, you're on your own." They moved through corridors that all looked the same, stone walls, oil lamps, cold air that tasted like metal. Leora's boots echoed too loud. Kara's didn't make a sound. "First rule," Kara said, without slowing. "Never turn your back on them, even when they're sleeping, especially the gray one. His name's Garen. He's the oldest by 3 minutes, and he knows it." "They have names?" "Of course they have names. What did you think we called them? Cub 1 through 5? Kara shot her a look that might have been annoyance or amusement. Hard to tell. "The brown twins are Dace and Torn. We can't tell them apart half the time, but they can. The black one's Sable. Quiet. Watches everything. Don't let that fool you. He's faster than the others when he wants to be." "And the smallest?" Kara's expression shifted, something that wasn't quite pity. "Ash. Born last. Came out wrong. The healers said he wouldn't make it past the first month. But he did." "Yeah, he did." Kara stopped at a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. "Second rule. Don't show weakness. They can smell fear, pain, hesitation. They'll use it against you. They're children. They're predators." Kara's hand rested on the door handle. "And the second you forget that is the second you die. Third rule. If one of them shifts early, you run. Don't try to help. Don't try to fight. You run, and you seal the door behind you. Understood?" Leora nodded, though her stomach twisted at the thought. Kara opened the door. The nursery was bigger than Leora expected. High ceilings, stone walls covered in deep scratches, a floor scattered with straw that looked like it had been shredded by something with claws. In the far corner sat 5 small beds, more like nests, really, piled with furs and blankets. The cubs were awake, all of them. Garen stood in the center of the room, his gold eyes fixed on the door. Dace and Torrin flanked him, their ears swiveling toward the sound of footsteps. Sable hung back in the shadows near the wall, perfectly still. And Ash sat alone by the window slit, his white fur catching what little light filtered through. "They've been waiting," Kara said quietly. "They knew you were coming." "How?" "You're sent. They marked you yesterday." She stepped aside. "You're up." Leora walked into the nursery. The door closed behind her with a sound that felt too final. The cubs didn't move. Leora stood just inside the doorway, her hands loose at her sides, and waited. She could feel their eyes on her, assessing, calculating, deciding whether yesterday had been real or just a fluke. Garen took a step forward. His posture was different than it had been in the arena, more controlled, less wild, like he'd spent the night thinking about what happened and had come to a conclusion she wasn't going to like. "Hey," Leora said quietly. The cub's ears flicked, but he didn't respond. She moved slowly, angling toward the center of the room. Not directly at him, not challenging, just present. I told you I'd come back. Garen's lip curled slightly, showing teeth. One of the twins, Dace, maybe, or Torin, made a low sound in his throat that might have been a warning. Sable shifted in the shadows, his eyes catching the lamplight. And Ash didn't move at all. Leora knelt. It was a risk. She knew that. Kneeling put her at eye level with them, made her smaller, but it also made her vulnerable. If Garen decided to test her, she'd have no leverage. She knelt anyway. I know you don't trust me yet, she said. That's fine, trust takes time, but I'm not going anywhere, so we might as well figure out how this works. Garen lunged, not at her, at the ground between them. He slammed his front paws down with enough force to crack the stone, his teeth bared, his entire body radiating aggression. It was a test. Leora didn't flinch, she met his eyes and held them. Didn't challenge, didn't submit, just met. The silence stretched. Then Garen sat. It wasn't surrender. It was curiosity. Leora exhaled slowly and reached into her pocket. She'd taken food from the meal hall that morning, dried meat, tough and salty, and now she pulled out a strip and held it up. Hungry? Garen's nose twitched. She tossed the meat, not at him, to the side, far enough that he'd have to move to get it. He didn't move. Suit yourself, Leora said, and tossed another piece toward the twins. Torin, or was it Dace, darted forward and snatched it midair. His brother followed, and within seconds they were play fighting over the scrap, growling and snapping in a way that looked vicious but wasn't. Sable emerged from the shadows, his eyes on the remaining pieces in Leora's hand. She tossed one to him. He caught it with a precision that made her think Kara was right. He was faster than he looked. That left one piece. She looked at Ash. The white cub hadn't moved from his spot by the window. His ears were forward, listening, but his body language screamed, "Stay away." Leora stood and walked over slowly. She didn't crouch, didn't reach out, just stopped a few feet away and held out the meat. This one's yours if you want it. Ash stared at her. She set the meat on the ground between them and stepped back. Then she turned her back on him. It was the stupidest thing she could have done. Kara's first rule, broken within the first 10 minutes. But instinct told her Ash didn't need dominance or caution. He needed proof that she wasn't a threat. She walked back to the center of the room and sat down cross-legged. Behind her she heard the soft scrape of claws on stone. When she glanced back, the meat was gone and Ash was back by the window. But his tail was up. The next 3 hours were chaos. Garen tested her 7 more times, charging, snapping, feinting attacks that stopped just short of contact. Each time, Leora stood her ground. Didn't fight back. Didn't retreat. Just held space and let him work through whatever he needed to work through. The twins were easier. They wanted attention more than dominance, and once Leora figured out that Dace had a white patch on his left ear and Torin didn't, she could tell them apart. Dace liked to wrestle. Torin liked to climb. He spent 20 minutes trying to scale her back while she sat still and let him. Sable watched everything but didn't engage. Every time Leora tried to approach, he melted into a different shadow. She stopped trying. He'd come to her when he was ready. Ash stayed by the window. By midday, Leora's arms were covered in scratches. Shallow, nothing serious, but enough to sting. Her ribs ached from where Garen had body-slammed her during one of his tests. And she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical effort and everything to do with the constant mental calculation of reading 5 different moods at once. The door opened. Kara stepped in with a tray of food, raw meat, thick cuts that smelled fresh. She set it down near the entrance and looked at Leora. You're still alive. Disappointed? Surprised. Kara's gaze swept the room. Garen usually draws blood by now. He tried. And? I didn't let him. Kara's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. Food's for them. You eat in the hall. I'm not leaving them. You need to eat. So do they. Leora nodded toward the tray. I'll eat later. Kara studied her for a long moment. Then she left without another word. Leora divided the meat into 5 portions, 4 equal, 1 smaller for Ash, and set them out across the room. The twins pounced immediately. Garen approached cautiously, sniffed his portion, then dragged it to a corner to eat alone. Sable took his and disappeared into the shadows. Ash didn't move. Leora picked up the smallest portion and carried it to him. She set it down within reach and sat against the wall nearby. "You don't have to eat it now," she said quietly, "but it's there when you want it." Ash's eyes flicked to the meat, then back to her. She closed her eyes and leaned her head against the stone. Every muscle in her body hurt. She could feel sleep pulling at her, but she fought it. Falling asleep here felt dangerous, felt like giving up control. She heard movement. When she opened her eyes, Ash was eating. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence, but he was eating, and that felt like a victory. The days blurred together. Leora fell into a rhythm she didn't quite understand but couldn't break. Wake before dawn. Enter the nursery. Spend 12 hours navigating the cubs' moods, their tests, their needs. Sleep in a corner of the room because leaving felt wrong. Wake again. Kara brought food, checked for injuries, said nothing about the fact that Leora never left. The council didn't visit. Ronan didn't visit. It was just her and the cubs. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, things started to shift. Garen stopped testing her with violence and started testing her with puzzles. He'd hide things, her coat, her boots, chunks of meat, and watch to see if she'd figure out where. When she did, he'd huff and find a new hiding spot. It became a game. The twins learned their names, learned commands: sit, stay, come. They didn't always listen, but they understood. And when they did listen, Leora made sure to reward them, not just with food, but with play. Wrestling, chasing, the kind of rough affection that wore them out and left them sprawled in happy, exhausted piles. Sable finally approached her on the 5th day. He didn't let her touch him, just sat close enough that she could feel his body heat, and that was enough. And Ash started following her. Not close. But when she moved across the room, he moved too. When she sat, he sat. When she spoke, his ears swiveled toward her voice. On the 7th day, he let her touch his injured leg. She'd been sitting against the wall, half asleep, when he limped over and collapsed beside her with a grunt. His leg was stretched out at an awkward angle, the way it always was when it hurt. Leora didn't move. Ash stared at the wall. After a long moment, she reached out slowly and rested her hand just above the joint. He stiffened, but he didn't pull away. She pressed gently, feeling for heat, for swelling. The leg was scarred, old damage, badly healed, probably a break that hadn't been set right. "Does it hurt all the time?" she asked quietly. Ash didn't answer, obviously, but his ears drooped. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. She kept her hand there until he fell asleep. Then she stayed still for another hour, because moving might wake him, and he looked like he needed the rest. On the 10th day, everything went wrong. Leora was working with Garen, teaching him to channel his aggression into something useful, like dragging weighted stones across the floor, when the door slammed open. Tarek walked in, flanked by 2 guards. The cubs scattered. Garen's hackles rose. The twins bolted to the far corner. Sable vanished. Ash pressed himself against the wall, his body shaking. Leora stood slowly. "What are you doing?" "Council inspection," Tarek said. His eyes swept the room, taking in the scratches on the walls, the shredded straw, the organized chaos that Leora had been building. "We need to see progress." "You're scaring them. They're predators. They don't get scared." Tarek walked further into the room, and one of the guards followed. The other stayed by the door. Garen growled. It was low, dangerous. Tarek stopped. "Control him. He's not a dog. He's a threat." Tarek's hand went to the blade at his hip. "Control him, or I will." Leora stepped between them. "You pull that blade and you'll have more than one cub to deal with." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." She didn't move. "You want to see progress?" "Fine, but not like this. Come back tomorrow. Alone. No weapons. No guards." Tarek's jaw worked. "You don't give me orders. And you don't come into this nursery and terrorize children." Leora's voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. "You want them to be stable? To be controllable? Then stop treating them like enemies. For a long moment, Tarek just stared at her. Then he smiled. It wasn't friendly. Tomorrow, he said, alone. And if I don't see progress, you're done. He left. The guards followed. The door slammed shut. Leora's knees buckled. She sank to the floor, breathing hard, and Garen was there instantly. He pressed against her side, his body tense, and for the first time since she'd met him, he didn't feel like a test. He felt like protection. The twins crept back. Sable emerged from wherever he'd been hiding, and Ash limped over and sat directly in front of her, his pale eyes locked on hers. "I know," she whispered. "I know." That night, she didn't sleep at all. She sat with the cubs curled around her and tried to figure out what progress looked like to a man like Tarek. Tried to figure out how to prove that what she was doing mattered when half the council thought she was wasting time. She thought about running, taking the cubs and disappearing into the northern woods, finding somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. But there was nowhere safe. Not for them, not for her. And running wouldn't prove anything. By dawn, she had a plan. It was risky. Probably stupid. But it was all she had. When Tarek arrived the next day, alone, as promised, but with a sneer that said he expected failure, Leora was ready. "Sit," she said, pointing to a spot near the wall. Tarek raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "You want to see progress. Sit. Watch. Don't talk. Don't move. Just watch." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he sat. Leora turned to the cubs. They were tense, wary, their eyes flicking between her and Tarek like they were waiting for violence. "Garen," she said quietly. The gray cub's ears swiveled toward her. "Come." He hesitated. Then he walked over and sat at her feet. "Good." She pulled out a piece of dried meat and handed it to him. He took it gently, no snapping, no aggression, and carried it back to his corner. She called the twins next. Then Sable. Each one responded. Each one controlled. And then she called Ash. The white cub limped forward slowly. When he reached her, she knelt and held out her hand. He pressed his nose against her palm, and then, impossibly, he rolled onto his back. Submission. Trust. Leora's throat tightened. She scratched his belly gently, and Ash's tail thumped against the floor. When she looked at Tarek, his expression was unreadable. "They're not weapons," she said quietly. "They're children. And if you keep treating them like the first, you'll never get the second." Tarek stood. He walked to the door without a word. Then he stopped and looked back at her. "1 month," he said. "You have 1 month to prove this works. After that, the council votes." He left, and Leora sat on the cold stone floor, surrounded by 5 cubs who just trusted her enough to perform for a man they hated, and realized she'd just bet everything on a single roll. The door was still swinging shut when Garen head-butted her shoulder hard enough to bruise. She laughed despite herself. "Yeah," she said, "I know, I'm an idiot." But they were her idiots now, and she'd be damned if she let anyone take that away. The problem was, 1 month wasn't enough time to undo generations of fear. Leora learned that 3 days later when Kara showed up at dawn with a split lip and fury in her eyes. "Get up," Kara said, her voice tight. "Now." Leora was already awake. She'd been awake for hours, watching Ash sleep fitfully in the corner, but she stood slowly, careful not to wake the cubs. What happened? The council happened. Kara's jaw worked like she was chewing glass. There was a fight last night. 2 alphas from the Eastern Pack got drunk and decided to settle an old grudge. It got bloody. 3 bystanders injured, 1 critically. What does that have to do with... "They're blaming you." Leora went still. "That doesn't make sense. Doesn't have to make sense. You're an outsider teaching royal cubs to be soft. That makes you an easy target." Kara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Tarek's pushing hard. Says your methods are weakening pack structure. Says if the future alphas learn to play instead of fight, the whole territory goes soft. Others are listening." "That's insane." "That's politics." Kara wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand. "I tried to argue your case. This is what I got for it." Leora's stomach dropped. "Who hit you?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is you've got a target on your back and the cubs are caught in the crossfire." Kara glanced at the sleeping forms scattered across the nursery. Ronan's called an emergency council session. Tonight, you're expected to attend. And say what? Whatever keeps you alive. Kara turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, I think you're right. About them. About all of it. But being right doesn't mean much when you're dead. She left before Leora could respond. The cubs knew something was wrong. They always knew. Garen stayed close all morning, his body tense, his eyes tracking every shadow. The twins were quiet. No playing, no roughhousing, just watchful silence. Sable disappeared entirely, and no amount of coaxing could draw him out. Even Ash seemed restless, pacing the perimeter of the room with his uneven gait, his ears swiveling at sounds Leora couldn't hear. By midday, Leora's nerves were frayed. She tried to work with them. Basic commands, simple games, but her heart wasn't in it, and the cubs could tell. Garen refused to engage. Day snapped at Torin over nothing, and when Leora reached for Ash, he pulled away. That hurt more than she expected. She sat against the wall and closed her eyes, trying to think, trying to plan. But every scenario she ran ended the same way, her removed from the nursery, the cubs handed over to someone who'd break them, and everything she'd built crumbling to dust. She didn't hear the door open. You look like hell. Leora's eyes snapped open. Ronan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He was alone. No guards, no council members, just him and the weight of authority that followed him like a shadow. The cubs scattered. Garen positioned himself between Ronan and Leora, his hackles raised. The twins bolted to the far corner. Sable's eyes gleamed from the darkness. Ash pressed against the wall, trembling. Ronan didn't move. You need to call them off. They're not attacking you. Not yet. His gray eyes flicked to Garen. But that one's thinking about it. Leora stood slowly. Garen, stand down. The gray cub didn't move. Garen! He growled, low, warning. Leora walked over and placed her hand on his head. I know, but not him. Not now. Garen's muscles were coiled tight, ready to spring, but after a long moment he sat. Didn't relax, just sat. Ronan's eyebrow lifted slightly. Impressive. What do you want? To see if you're worth the fight I'm about to have. He stepped further into the room, moving with the kind of deliberate calm that came from years of walking into danger. Tarek's convinced half the council that you're a threat. The other half doesn't care enough to argue. That leaves me. Why? Why what? Why fight for me? Leora's hands clenched at her sides. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. And according to your counsel, I'm making everything worse. Ronan stopped a few feet away. Up close, he was even bigger than she'd thought. Broad shoulders, scarred knuckles, the kind of presence that filled a room. But his eyes weren't cruel, just tired. Because I've seen what happens when we raise alphas on nothing but violence, he said quietly. My father did it. His father before him. Every generation, the same pattern. Beat them into submission. Teach them that strength is the only thing that matters. Watch them grow into leaders who rule through fear. He looked at the cubs. It works. For a while. But fear doesn't build loyalty. It builds resentment. And eventually, someone gets strong enough to challenge, and the whole thing collapses in blood. Leora said nothing. You're doing something different, Ronan continued. I don't fully understand it. Half the time I think it's reckless. But I've watched those cubs respond to you in ways they never responded to anyone else. That means something. Tarek doesn't think so. Tarek thinks strength is measured in scars and body count. He's wrong, but he's loud, and loud carries weight in council chambers. Ronan's jaw tightened. Tonight, they're going to demand proof that your methods work. Real proof. Not party tricks, not obedience. They want to see that these cubs can handle what's coming. And what's coming? The right of dominance. Leora's blood went cold. She'd heard whispers about the right. Every pack had some version of it. A test. A trial. A way to prove that young alphas were ready to lead. They're too young, she said flatly. I know. They'll get hurt. Or worse. I know. Ronan's expression was grim. But if we don't give the council something, they'll vote you out tonight, and then someone else takes over. Someone who'll do it Tarek's way. What does the right involve? Ronan hesitated. That alone told her it was bad. Combat trial, he said finally. 3 stages. First stage, they face trained warriors in controlled sparring. No killing, but contact is real. Second stage, they navigate the northern woods alone for 3 days. Third stage, they face a live threat. What kind of threat? Depends. Usually a rogue alpha. Sometimes a wild predator. His eyes met hers. Sometimes both. Leora felt sick. You can't be serious. I don't make the laws. I enforce them. But he didn't sound happy about it. The right exists because alphas need to prove they can survive, that they can protect, that they can lead. They're children. They're Varric blood. They'll be held to Varric standards. Ronan exhaled slowly. I can delay it. Give you 2 more weeks. But that's all I can buy you. After that, the council forces my hand. And if they fail? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Leora looked at the cubs. Garen was watching the conversation with sharp eyes. The twins had crept closer, listening. Even Ash had stopped trembling, his attention fixed on Ronan like he understood every word. 2 weeks, she said quietly. Ronan nodded. 2 weeks. Make them count. He left without another word. The door closed and Leora sank to the floor. Garen approached cautiously and pressed his head against her shoulder. The twins flanked her. Sable emerged from the shadows and sat at the edge of the group. And Ash, small, fragile Ash, limped over and climbed into her lap. She held him and tried not to think about what would happen if she failed. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Leora restructured everything. No more games, no more gentle coaxing. She pushed the cubs harder than she'd ever pushed them, drilling commands until they responded on instinct, running endurance exercises until they collapsed, teaching them to fight not for dominance, but for survival. Garen took to it like he'd been waiting for permission. He was fast, vicious when he needed to be, and smart enough to know when to hold back. The twins struggled at first, they'd gotten too used to playing. But once they understood the stakes, they adapted. Sable became her secret weapon, moving through training exercises like a shadow, landing hits no one saw coming. Ash was the problem. His legs slowed him down, made him vulnerable, and no amount of training could change the fact that in a real fight, he'd be a target. Leora worked with him separately, late at night when the others were asleep. She taught him to use his size as an advantage, how to slip under defenses, how to go for weak points, how to survive long enough for help to arrive. But she could see the doubt in his pale eyes. He didn't think he'd make it. Neither did she. On the 10th day, Kara brought news. They're accelerating the timeline. Leora looked up from where she was wrapping a scrape on Torrin's leg. What? The right. It's happening in 4 days. Kara's expression was hard. Tarek pushed it through, said waiting was a waste of resources. That's not enough time. I know. Kara crouched beside her. There's something else. The live threat stage. It's not going to be a rogue alpha. Leora's hand stilled. Then what? A feral. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Ferals were alphas who'd lost themselves to the shift, who'd stayed in their animal form so long they forgot how to be human. They were fast, brutal, and completely unhinged, killing machines with no conscience and no control. They're sending children against a feral, Leora said slowly. They're sending royal cubs against a controlled threat in a monitored environment, Kara corrected. That's how Tarek's spinning it. He's saying it's traditional, historical, that every Varric alpha has faced the same test. And you believe that? Kara's silence was answer enough. Leora stood. I need to see Ronan. He's in the war room. Council's in session. I don't care. Get me in there. Kara studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. This is going to get ugly. It's already ugly. The war room was exactly what it sounded like. A stone chamber dominated by a massive table covered in maps, markers, and the remnants of 1,000 strategic arguments. The council sat around it, voices raised, tension thick enough to choke on. Leora walked in without permission. The room went silent. Tarek was on his feet, mid-sentence, his face red with anger. Marin sat with her fingers steepled, watching everything. Ronan stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, expression carved from ice. You can't be here, Tarek said. Then throw me out. Leora walked straight to the table and planted her hands on it. I want to know who decided to send 5 cubs, the youngest barely 3 months past weaning, against a feral. That's not your concern. Like hell it's not. They're in my care. For now, Tarek shot back. But after the rite, that changes. Assuming they survive. Assuming, Leora's voice was cold. You're gambling with their lives to make a point. I'm upholding tradition. You're covering your ass, she looked around the table. All of you. You're so terrified of looking weak that you're willing to sacrifice children to prove you're strong. Careful, Marin said quietly. You're talking to the Council of Blackridge. We don't take accusations lightly. And I don't take threats lightly. Leora didn't back down. Change the terms. Give them a fair fight. The right is fair, another counselor said, an older man with white hair and scars that covered half his face. Every alpha faces it. Every alpha faces it at full maturity, not as cubs. They're Varric blood, Tarek said. They're held to higher standards. Then hold yourselves to higher standards and stop hiding behind tradition when you mean murder. Ronan's voice cut through the room like a blade. Enough! Everyone looked at him. He pushed off from the wall and walked to the table, his presence shifting the entire energy of the room. When he spoke, his voice was level, but there was steel underneath. The right stands. 4 days. 3 stages. Live threat included. Leora's heart sank. But, Ronan continued, his eyes on Tarek, the terms change. The feral will be chained. Range limited to 50 feet. The cubs work as a unit, not individually. And if any of them are critically injured, the trial ends immediately. That's not protocol, Tarek protested. I'm changing protocol. Ronan's tone left no room for argument. We're testing their ability to survive and lead, not their ability to die well. Those are the terms. Accept them or challenge me for the seat. Tarek's jaw worked, but he sat down. Ronan looked at Leora. You have 4 days. Use them. She nodded and left before anyone could say anything else. 4 days. Leora barely slept. She drilled the cubs relentlessly. Formations, pack tactics, coordinated attacks. She taught them to move as one unit, to cover each other's weaknesses, to trust that someone would be there when they stumbled. Garen became the anchor, strong, fast, aggressive when needed, but disciplined enough to hold the line. The twins became the flankers, quick, coordinated, able to strike from angles the enemy wouldn't expect. Sable became the shadow, the one who slipped through defenses and landed killing blows before anyone knew he was there. And Ash became the strategist. Leora discovered it by accident on the second day. She'd set up a mock combat scenario, Kara playing the role of aggressor, and watched the cubs attempt to take her down. They failed 3 times. On the 4th attempt, Ash sat back and watched. Then he made a sound, low, specific, and the others shifted instantly. Garen went high. The twins split. Sable circled, and Kara went down in under 10 seconds. What was that? Leora asked. Ash just looked at her with those 2 smart eyes. She realized then that his weakness wasn't a liability. It was a perspective. He couldn't rely on strength, so he'd learned to read patterns, to see openings, to direct the others where they needed to be. She built the entire strategy around him. By the night before the rite, they were ready. As ready as they'd ever be. Leora sat with them in the nursery, all 5 cubs pressed against her in a pile of fur and warmth and nervous energy. Tomorrow's going to be hard, she said quietly. Harder than anything you've faced. But you're not alone. You have each other, and you have me. Garen huffed. I know, I can't go with you into the trial, but I'll be there, watching. And when it's over, we're walking out of this together. She didn't know if that was true, but she needed them to believe it. The rite began at dawn. The entire pack gathered in the arena, hundreds of them, filling the stone benches, their voices a low roar of anticipation. Leora stood at the edge with Kara, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood. The cubs entered through the main gate. They looked so small. Garen led, his head high despite the fear Leora could see in the tension of his shoulders. The twins flanked him. Sable moved like liquid shadow, and Ash brought up the rear, limping but determined. The first stage was sparring. 3 warriors entered the arena, veterans, all of them, with scars and muscle and years of experience. They weren't trying to kill. just a test. The cubs held their own. Garen took the brunt of the attacks, his size and aggression buying the others time. The twins worked in tandem, one distracting while the other struck. Sable moved through gaps, landing hits that drew blood, and Ash called the shots, his voice cutting through the chaos with commands that kept them alive. They won. Barely. The crowd roared. The second stage was survival. The cubs were released into the northern woods with nothing but instinct and each other. 3 days alone. No food provided. No shelter. Just survive. Leora wasn't allowed to follow. Those 3 days were the longest of her life. She didn't eat, didn't sleep, just paced the halls and waited for news that never came. On the third day, they returned. All 5 of them. Thin, dirty, exhausted, but alive. The crowd's reaction was muted. They'd expected losses. The third stage began immediately. The feral was brought in. It was massive, an alpha who'd shifted years ago and never come back. Its fur was matted, its eyes wild, its movements jerky and wrong. The chains around its neck rattled as it lunged against them, testing the limits. 50 feet of range. The cubs stood in formation, and the chains released. The feral charged. What happened next was chaos. Garen met it head-on, taking a hit that should have killed him. The twins darted in, slashing at its flanks. Sable went for the throat and missed. The feral's claws caught Torin across the ribs, and the cub went down screaming. Ash's voice cut through the noise, sharp, commanding. The formation shifted. Garen pulled back. Dace covered Torin, Sable circled. And when the feral lunged again, they were ready. Garen hit low, Sable hit high. Dace struck from the side. The feral collapsed. It wasn't dead, but it was down. The crowd erupted. Leora's knees gave out. Kara caught her. They did it! Torin! He's alive! Injured, but alive. Ronan appeared beside them, his expression unreadable. Get a healer to the arena. Now! Guards rushed forward. The cubs were escorted out, Torin carried, the others limping but walking. And Leora was already moving, pushing through the crowd, ignoring the voices and the hands trying to stop her. She reached the cubs just as the healers arrived. Torin was bleeding badly. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were open. "You're okay," Leora said, kneeling beside him. "You're okay." He whined softly. The healer pushed her aside. "We need space." Leora stepped back, her heart in her throat. The other cubs pressed against her legs. Garen, Dace, Sable, Ash. All of them shaking. All of them alive. Ronan's voice came from behind her. "They passed." She turned. "What?" "The right. They passed. All of them." His gray eyes met hers. "You did it." She didn't feel victorious. She felt like she'd just watched children go to war. And won. Tarek appeared at Ronan's shoulder, his expression tight. "This doesn't change anything." "Yes," Ronan said quietly. "It does." Before Tarek could respond, a commotion erupted from the crowd. Someone was shouting, and then Leora saw her. A woman pushing through the guards, her face twisted with rage, her hand reaching for a blade. "She's killing them!" the woman screamed. "She's making them weak. She has to die." The blade came free. The woman lunged, and Ash, small, broken Ash, threw himself between Leora and the attacker. The blade went through his shoulder. He collapsed. Everything stopped. Leora's scream tore through the arena like a living thing. Guards tackled the woman. Ronan was shouting orders. The healer abandoned Torin and rushed to Ash, and Leora dropped to her knees beside the small white cub, her hands covering the wound, blood pouring through her fingers. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Ash's eyes found hers, and he didn't look afraid. He looked like he'd made a choice. The same way she had. The healer's hands moved fast. Pressure, cloth, something that smelled sharp and medicinal, but all Leora could see was blood. Too much blood for something so small. "Move!" the healer barked. An older woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and hands that had clearly done this 1,000 times. "I need space." Leora didn't move. Couldn't move. Her hands were still pressed against Ash's shoulder, feeling his heartbeat flutter against her palms like a dying bird. "Leora," Ronan's voice close to her ear. "Let her work." "Let her work." Strong hands gripped her shoulders and pulled her back. She fought for half a second before her legs gave out entirely. Ronan caught her weight, lowering her to the ground a few feet away while the healer bent over Ash's small body. The other cubs were going insane. Garen was trying to get to Ash, snarling and snapping at anyone who came close. The twins had backed into a corner, their bodies pressed together, eyes wild. Sable had disappeared completely, and Torin, injured, bleeding Torin, was trying to crawl toward his packmate despite the second healer's attempts to restrain him. "Someone get those cubs under control!" Tarek's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Touch them, and you're dead," Leora said. Her voice came out raw, broken, but the threat was clear. Tarek's eyes narrowed. "You're in no position to—" "She's right." Ronan stood, placing himself between Tarek and the cubs. "Everyone back, now!" The crowd had grown. Half the pack was pressing in, trying to see what happened, voices rising in confusion and speculation. Guards formed a perimeter, but it was thin and getting thinner. The woman who'd attacked, the one with the knife, was on the ground, pinned by two guards, still screaming. "She's destroying everything. The cubs are supposed to be warriors, not pets. She's making them weak." "Shut her up," Ronan said quietly. One of the guards struck her across the face. The screaming stopped, replaced by ugly sobbing. Leora forced herself to breathe, to focus. The healer was working on Ash with quick, efficient movements, cleaning the wound, packing it with something that made Ash's whole body jerk. The cub made a sound that cut straight through Leora's chest. "Is he going to die?" she asked. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. The healer didn't look up. "Not if I can help it. Blade missed the major vessels, but he's small, and he's lost blood. Next few hours will tell." Hours. Leora's vision blurred. "Kara," Ronan's voice again, steady as stone. "Get the cubs to the medical wing. All of them. Keep them together." "Sir?" "Together. That's not a request." Kara appeared at Leora's side, her expression grim. "Come on, you too." "I'm not leaving him." "You're not helping him by sitting here bleeding." Kara grabbed her arm, and Leora realized for the first time that her hands were shredded. Defensive wounds from where she'd tried to block the attacker. She hadn't even felt it happen. The healer carefully lifted Ash. The cub was unconscious now, his small body limp, white fur matted with blood. Garen tried to follow, and this time Leora moved. She pushed herself upright, her legs shook but held, and placed her hand on Garen's head. "With me," she said quietly. Garen's gold eyes locked on hers. He was shaking. They were all shaking. "All of you. With me." One by one they fell in line, Garen at her side, Dace and Sable flanking. Even Torin, who could barely walk, limped along with a guard supporting his weight. They moved through the arena as a unit, and the crowd parted. Leora didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge the stares, the whispers, the hostility still simmering beneath the surface. She just walked, one foot in front of the other, following the healer toward the medical wing. Behind her, she heard Ronan's voice addressing the crowd. "Council chambers, 1 hour. Everyone?" "Dut." The medical wing smelled like herbs and old blood. They set Ash on a table in the center of the room, and the healer went to work with an assistant, a younger man who looked barely out of his teens but moved with confidence. Leora stood against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, watching every movement. Kara was cleaning Leora's hands, wrapping them in strips of clean cloth. "You need stitches." "Later." Leora said, "Later." Kara didn't argue. She finished the wrapping and stepped back. The cubs had arranged themselves around Ash's table. Garen sat directly beneath it, his eyes never leaving the small white form above. The twins pressed against each other nearby. Sable had reappeared and was perched on a shelf in the corner, watching everything with unblinking intensity. And Torin, poor brave Torin, had refused to let the assistant treat his ribs until he could see Ash. "He's stable," the healer said finally. She was stitching the wound closed with practiced precision, her hand steady despite the hour. The blade went clean through, missed bone, missed major vessels. "He got lucky." "Lucky," Leora repeated. The word tasted like ash. "He'll need time to heal, at least 2 weeks before he can put weight on that leg. And even then," the healer hesitated. "He's small, weaker than the others. This kind of trauma—" She didn't finish, but Leora heard it anyway. "He might not recover fully." "Can I—" Leora's voice cracked. Can I stay with him? The healer glanced at her, then at the cubs arranged like sentinels around the table. I don't think I could make you leave if I tried. She finished the stitching and applied a thick bandage. Ash's breathing was shallow but steady. His eyes were closed, his body still. He'll wake soon, the healer said. When he does, keep him calm. No stress, no movement, just rest. Leora nodded. The healer moved to Torin next, and Leora finally allowed herself to sink to the floor beside Garen. The gray cub immediately pressed against her side, his body radiating heat and tension. I know, she whispered. I know. The door opened. Marin walked in, alone, her silver hair pulled back tight, her expression unreadable. She took in the scene, the cubs, the blood, Leora sitting on the floor like a broken thing, and something shifted in her eyes. The woman who attacked you is in custody, Marin said. She'll face trial. I don't care about her. You should. Marin moved closer, her hands clasped behind her back. Her name is Vera. She lost her son 5 years ago in a rite that went wrong. He was 10, not ready, but the council pushed it through anyway because his bloodline was important. Leora looked up sharply. And she blames me? She blames anyone who questions tradition. You're just the newest target. Marin's gaze drifted to Ash. What that cub did, throwing himself between you and a blade, that's not weakness. That's loyalty. The kind we've been trying to breed into alphas for generations and failing because we teach them that loyalty is submission. Why are you telling me this? Because the council meets in 40 minutes, and Tarek's going to use what happened as proof that your methods are dangerous. Marin's voice was calm, clinical. He'll say the cubs are too attached to you, that their loyalty to a single person makes them vulnerable, that a proper alpha serves the pack, not an individual. And what do you say? Marin was quiet for a moment. Then she crouched down, bringing herself to eye level with Leora. I say that cub didn't throw himself in front of a blade because you made him weak. He did it because you made him believe he was worth protecting something. That's not a flaw. That's the foundation of every strong pack that's ever existed. She stood and walked to the door. Before leaving, she looked back. Ronan's fighting for you, but he can't do it alone. If you want to survive this, you need to fight too. The door closed. Leora sat in the silence, surrounded by cubs who'd just proven they were stronger than anyone believed, and tried to figure out what fighting looked like when you had nothing left. Ash woke an hour later. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused, and for a moment he just stared at the ceiling. Then his gaze found Leora, and his tail twitched. Hey, she whispered. You're okay. You're safe. He tried to move and whimpered. Don't. Just stay still. She reached through the gap under the table and touched his nose gently. You scared me. Ash made a low sound in his throat. Not quite a whine, not quite a growl. More like a question. The woman's gone. You're safe. All of you are safe. Garen shifted beside her, and Ash's eyes tracked to him. The two cubs stared at each other for a long moment. Then Garen stood, walked to the table, and very carefully touched his nose to Ash's. The twins followed. Then Sable. Even Torin, ribs wrapped, moving stiffly, limped over and pressed his forehead against Ash's good shoulder. They stayed like that for several minutes. A pile of battered cubs holding vigil over their smallest member. And something in Leora's chest cracked wide open. These weren't just cubs anymore. They were a pack. And she'd built that. Not through dominance or fear or tradition, through trust. The door opened again. This time it was Ronan. And he wasn't alone. Kara followed, along with 2 guards Leora didn't recognize. Council's waiting, Ronan said. His voice was neutral, but his eyes went immediately to Ash. How is he? Alive. Good. He looked at the other cubs. That's 5 survivors from a rite that was designed to break them. The council can't ignore that. Tarek will try. Let him. Ronan's expression hardened. You're coming to the council chamber now. I'm not leaving them. You're not. Kara stays with them. The guards stay with Kara. Anyone tries to get in, they answer to me. He stepped closer. But you need to be there. They're going to decide your fate, and the cub's fate, in the next hour. You don't show up, you forfeit. Leora looked at Garen. The gray cub met her eyes, and after a moment he sat. Permission. She stood slowly, her whole body aching. If anything happens, nothing will happen, Kara said firmly. I've got them. Leora followed Ronan out of the medical wing, her wrapped hands hanging at her sides, her mind racing through every possible argument and finding them all insufficient. The council chamber was packed. Not just the 12 council members, but dozens of pack leaders, representatives from allied territories, even a few from rival packs who'd come to watch Blackridge tear itself apart. The air was thick with tension and barely concealed anticipation. Leora walked in and every eye turned to her. She looked like hell. Blood-stained clothes, bandaged hands, hair tangled, face pale, but she didn't drop her gaze. Tarek was already standing at the center of the room, his posture aggressive. This is what your methods get us. A cub nearly dead, an outsider attacked in our own arena. Chaos. Weakness. That cub is alive because he chose to protect someone he trusted, Ronan said from his seat at the head of the table. That's not weakness. It's misplaced loyalty. He should have let the guards handle it. Instead, he put himself in danger for an Omega who has no business. Careful, Leora said quietly. Tarek turned to her. Excuse me? I said be careful. She walked forward until she stood in the center of the room, surrounded by hostile faces. You want to talk about weakness? Let's talk about it. You sent 5 cubs, 3 months past weaning, into a rite designed for full-grown alphas. You pitted them against trained warriors, threw them into the wilderness alone, and made them fight a feral. And all 5 of them survived. Barely. Barely is still breathing, which is more than you expected. She looked around the room. You wanted proof my methods work? There it is. 5 cubs who should have died, who everyone in this room thought would die, and they didn't because I taught them something you never could. And what's that? The counselor asked. An older woman with scars across her throat. That survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about being smart enough to know when to fight and when to protect. It's about trusting the people beside you to have your back when you fall. Leora's voice was steady now, gaining strength. You've been raising alphas on fear for generations, teaching them that showing vulnerability is death. And what's it gotten you? Leaders who rule through intimidation, packs that fracture the second someone stronger comes along, a system so brittle that one outsider Omega can threaten it just by teaching cubs to play. The room erupted, voices overlapped, some shouting agreement, others hurling accusations. Tarek was red-faced, gesturing wildly. Marin sat silent, watching. And Ronan was smiling, not a kind smile, a dangerous one. He stood, and the room went quiet. Vote, he said simply. Tarek's expression shifted. What? You want her gone. Others want her to stay. Let's settle this. Ronan's gray eyes swept the council. All in favor of removing Leora Vale from her position and reassigning the cubs to traditional handlers, raise your hand. 5 hands went up. Tarek. 3 other counselors and 1 pack leader from a rival territory. All opposed. 7 hands, including Marin's. Ronan didn't raise his hand. He didn't need to. Motion fails. She stays. Tarek looked like he'd been slapped. This is over. Ronan's voice cut like a blade. The cubs passed the rite, all of them, under her guidance. That's the end of the discussion. You're making a mistake. Then it's mine to make. Ronan turned to Leora. You have 6 months. Prove that what you're building lasts. Prove it can handle real pressure, real threats, real challenges. Do that, and the council will have no choice but to accept it. And if I can't? His expression was unreadable. Then we go back to the old ways, and the cubs pay the price. It wasn't a victory. It was a stay of execution, but it was enough. Indeed. Leora returned to the medical wing to find the cubs exactly as she'd left them, Garen under the table, the others arranged in a protective circle, Kara standing watch with her arms crossed. Well? Kara asked. 6 months? Could be worse. Could be better. Ash was awake again, his pale eyes tracking her movements as she approached. She knelt beside the table and touched his nose gently. We bought some time, she said quietly. Now we have to use it. Over the next 3 weeks, Ash healed slowly. The wound closed. The bandages came off. But he was weaker than before, slower, more hesitant. The injury had taken something from him that rest couldn't restore. Leora worked with him every day. Gentle exercises, short walks, building strength without pushing too hard. The other cubs stayed close, especially Garen, who seemed to have appointed himself Ash's personal guardian. And something unexpected started to happen. Word spread about the right, about the cubs who'd survived, about the Omega who'd taught them how. Pack members started showing up at the nursery. Not hostile, just curious. A mother with a young cub who was struggling with aggression. Could Leora help? A handler who'd been working with a traumatized rescue. What methods did she use? An elder who'd watched the right and wanted to understand how she'd gotten the cubs to work together. Leora said yes to all of them. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. If she was going to prove her methods worked beyond the royal cubs, she needed to show they applied everywhere. The nursery expanded. 5 cubs became 8. Then 12, then 15. Not all royal, not all alpha. Some were betas, a few omegas, all of them struggling, all of them written off by someone. Leora treated them the same way she'd treated Garen and the others. Firm but fair, discipline balanced with play, structure built on trust instead of fear. And it worked. The aggressive cub learned to channel his energy into training. The traumatized rescue stopped flinching at sudden movements. The Omega cub, a tiny thing named Vera, who'd been abandoned because she was too small, started thriving. The pack noticed. 3 months in, Marin approached Leora during a training session. "You've built something," Marin said, watching Garen lead a group of mixed cubs through a coordination exercise. "Something I didn't think was possible. It's not finished." "Nothing ever is." Marin's sharp eyes tracked Ash, who was sitting to the side, calling directions. "But it's working. The council sees it. Even Tarek, though he'd rather eat glass than admit it." "So what now? Now you prove it holds under pressure." Marin turned to face her. "There's a gathering in 2 months, every major pack in the Northern Territories. They come to negotiate treaties, settle disputes, show strength. Ronan wants to present the cubs." Leora's stomach dropped. "They're not ready for that. They survived a feral. They're ready." Marin's expression was serious. "But it won't be easy. Other packs will see this as Blackridge going soft. They'll test you. Test them. If the cubs falter, if they show weakness in front of rival alphas, everything you've built collapses. And if they don't, then you change the North, Bob. 2 months of preparation." Leora pushed the cubs harder than ever, but differently. Not just physical training. Diplomacy. Control. How to stand in a room full of hostile alphas and not back down. How to show strength without aggression. Garen struggled with it. He wanted to fight, to prove himself through dominance. Leora spent hours teaching him that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was walk away. The twins learned to read social cues, to anticipate conflict before it erupted. Sable became her spy, quiet, observant, able to slip through crowds and report back what he heard. And Ash became her diplomat. His size made other alphas underestimate him. His calm demeanor disarmed them, and his intelligence let him navigate conversations that would have ended in bloodshed if Garen had been leading. The gathering arrived faster than Leora was ready for. Hundreds of alphas descended on Blackridge. Tents filled the valley. Bonfires lit the night, and everywhere tension simmered just below the surface. Ronan presented the cubs on the 3rd night, in the Great Hall, in front of every pack leader in the north. Leora stood at the edge of the room, her heart in her throat, as Garen led the others forward. They moved as a unit, coordinated, confident. When challenged by a rival alpha twice Garen's size, Garen didn't attack. He stood his ground, met the alpha's eyes, and held until the other looked away first. The twins demonstrated coordinated combat, fluid, precise, devastating. Sable showed stealth techniques that made even veteran warriors nod in approval. And Ash, small, limping Ash, engaged in a strategic debate with a council elder from the Eastern Territories and won through sheer logic. The room was silent when they finished. Then one alpha started clapping, then another. Then the entire hall erupted in acknowledgement. Leora's knees nearly gave out. Ronan found her afterward, his expression carefully neutral. "You did it." "They did it." Same thing. He looked at the cubs, now surrounded by pack leaders asking questions, making offers. "The North is watching. What you do next matters." "What I do next? They're not the only cubs who need this." Ronan's gray eyes met hers. How many more can you handle? Leora looked at Garen, at Ash, at all of them, saw the confidence in their posture, the trust in their eyes. As many as it takes, she said, and for the first time since arriving in Blackridge, she believed it. As many as it takes, she said, and for the first time since arriving in Blackridge, she believed it. The belief lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning after the gathering, Leora woke to find the nursery surrounded by guards. Not the usual 2 stationed at the door. 20. Armed. Their faces grim. She was on her feet instantly, her heart already racing. The cubs sensed it. Garen's head snapped up, the twins scrambled to their feet, Sable melted into the shadows, and Ash positioned himself behind her legs despite his injury. Kara pushed through the guards, her expression dark. Get dressed. Ronan wants you in the war room. Now. What happened? Border attack, Eastern Ridge. 3 dead, 7 injured. Kara's voice was clipped. They're saying it's connected to you. Leora's stomach dropped. That's impossible. Tell that to the council. Move. She pulled on her coat and followed Kara through corridors that felt suddenly hostile. Pack members she'd started to recognize, people who'd nodded at her in passing, who'd brought their cubs to train, now turned away or stared with open suspicion. The war room was chaos when she entered. Maps covered every surface. Council members shouted over each other. And at the center of it all stood Ronan, his face carved from stone, and Tarek looking like he'd won something. There she is, Tarek said, his voice dripping with false civility. The architect of our destruction. Enough, Ronan said, but his eyes on Leora were cold, assessing. What's going on? Leora demanded. Marin stepped forward, a rolled parchment in her hand. This arrived with the bodies. She unrolled it on the table. The message was short, written in blood. Your weakness invited this. More will die until strength returns to Blackridge. It was signed with the mark of the Thornback Pack, a rival territory to the east that had been pushing at Blackridge's borders for years. They're using the gathering as proof, Marin said quietly. Proof that Blackridge has gone soft. That showing diplomacy instead of dominance makes us a target. That's not, Leora started. Isn't it? Tarek cut in. We parade cubs in front of the North, show them playing nice using words instead of claws. And 3 days later, Thornback attacks because they think we won't fight back. We will fight back, Ronan said, his voice hard. Of course we will. But the damage is done. Tarek turned to the council. Every pack leader at that gathering saw what we've become. Saw us elevating an Omega. Saw us teaching royal cubs to negotiate instead of dominate. And now they're testing us. Thornback is just the first. You don't know that, Leora said. I know that we haven't been attacked on our own territory in 15 years. And I know it started the moment you walked into this pack. Tarek's eyes were hard. Your methods might work in a nursery, but out here, in the real world, they get people killed. The room erupted in argument. Leora stood frozen, the words hitting like physical blows. She'd known resistance would come, had expected it. But this, people dying, attacks happening, all of it tied to her. Quiet. Ronan's voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. Everyone fell silent. He looked at Leora, and for the first time since she'd known him, she couldn't read his expression. You have a choice. Step down voluntarily. Leave Blackridge. We'll say you went back to wherever you came from, and maybe that's enough to satisfy the other packs. Or, she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Or you prove Tarek wrong. Prove that what you've built isn't weakness. His gray eyes were unreadable. Thornback wants a response. I'm sending a delegation to their territory to negotiate terms or deliver consequences. You're going with them. The room exploded again. That's insane, someone shouted. She's not a warrior. Sending an Omega into Thornback territory is suicide. I said quiet. Ronan didn't raise his voice, but everyone shut up. He kept his eyes on Leora. You wanted to change how we do things. This is your chance. Go to Thornback. Use those methods you're so confident in. If you can resolve this without bloodshed, you prove your point. If you can't... He didn't finish, didn't need to. Leora's mind raced. Thornback was notorious. Brutal, aggressive, led by an alpha named Kale, who'd built his reputation on crushing anyone who showed weakness, going there as an Omega, as an outsider, as the symbol of everything they despised. It was a death sentence. Unless it wasn't. "I'll go," she said. Tarek laughed. "You'll be dead within an hour." "Maybe. But if I am, at least you'll have someone to blame." She looked at Ronan. "I'll need the cubs." The room went dead silent. "Absolutely not," Marin said. "They're too young." "They're the proof," Leora interrupted. "You want me to show Thornback that strength and strategy can coexist? The balance works? I can't do that by myself. But the cubs, they're living evidence of what I'm talking about." "You're asking me to send royal heirs into hostile territory," Ronan said slowly. "I'm asking you to let them do what they were trained to do. Survive. Adapt. Lead." She took a breath. "And I'm asking you to trust me one more time." The silence stretched, then Ronan nodded once. "You leave at dawn. Take Kara and 4 guards. If anything happens to those cubs, it won't. It better not." His expression was hard as iron, "because if it does, there won't be anywhere far enough for you to run." Sad. Leora spent the rest of the day preparing. The cubs knew something was wrong. They circled her constantly, restless and anxious. When she finally sat them down and explained, Garen's response was immediate, a low growl that said he was ready to fight. "No fighting," Leora said firmly. "Not unless there's no other choice. We're going into their territory, their rules. We show respect, we show strength, but we don't start a war." "And if they start one?" Kara asked from the doorway. She'd been listening. "Then we finish it." Leora looked at each cub in turn. "But only if we have to. Understood?" Garen huffed, but sat. The twins nodded. Sable was already gone, probably scouting, gathering information the way he always did, and Ash limped over and pressed his nose against her hand. "I know you're scared," she said quietly, just to him. "I am too. But we're in this together, all of us." His pale eyes held hers, and she saw something in them that made her chest tight. Trust. They left at dawn. 6 guards, not 4, Ronan had insisted. Kara led the group, her hand never far from her blade. The cubs traveled in formation, with Garen at point, the twins flanking, Sable ranging wide, and Ash staying close to Leora. The journey to Thornback territory took 2 days. 2 days of hostile terrain, steep ridges, dense forest, cold that bit through every layer of clothing. 2 days of watching the guards get more nervous the closer they got. 2 days of Leora second-guessing every decision that had led her here. They crossed the border at midday on the 2nd day. The Thornback patrol was waiting for them. 12 warriors, all of them massive, all of them armed. Their leader was a woman with a scar that split her face from forehead to jaw and eyes like chips of flint. "You're the Omega," she said. Not a question. "I'm Leora Vale. I'm here to speak with Kael." The woman's smile was not friendly. "He's expecting you. Didn't think you'd be stupid enough to actually show up." "Here I am." The patrol surrounded them and marched them deeper into Thornback territory. The guards from Blackridge stayed close, hands on weapons, but Leora could see the tension in their shoulders. They were outnumbered 3 to 1, and everyone knew it. The Thornback compound was built into the side of a mountain, all stone and timber and defensive positions that could hold off an army. Warriors watched from every vantage point. The air smelled like smoke and blood and something wild. They were taken to the central hall. Kael was waiting. He was everything the stories said, huge, scarred, with eyes that looked like they'd never known mercy. He sat in a chair that was more throne than furniture, surrounded by his council, all of them watching Leora like she was prey. "So," Kael said, his voice like gravel, "Blackridge sends me an Omega and some cubs. Should I be insulted or amused?" "Neither," Leora said. She kept her voice steady, her posture straight. "I'm here to talk about the attack." "What's there to talk about? You're weak. We took advantage. That's how this works." "And when Blackridge retaliates? Sends their full force to your borders? Burns this place to the ground? Is that how it works too?" Kael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You threatening me, Omega?" "I'm asking you a question. You started this because you think we're weak. Fine. Prove it. But know that proving it means war. Real war. Not border skirmishes. Full conflict that'll cost both our packs more than either of us can afford. We can afford it. Can you? Lior took a step forward. The guards tensed, but Kyle waved them back. Because from where I'm standing, you just picked a fight with the strongest territory in the north. Over what? Pride? Fear that maybe strength looks different than you thought? Careful, Kyle said, his voice dropping dangerously low. I'm being realistic. You want to test Blackridge? Fine, test us. She gestured to the cubs. These 5 survived a rite designed to kill them, fought a feral and won, and they did it by working together, by being smart instead of just strong. That's not weakness. That's evolution. Kyle leaned forward. Pretty speech. Doesn't change the fact that you're standing in my hall, unarmed, surrounded by warriors who could tear you apart before your guards took a breath. What's stopping me? Nothing, Leora said. Except the fact that killing me proves my point, that you're so terrified of change, so locked into old patterns, that the only answer you have to a new idea is violence. The hall went silent. Kyle stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You've got guts, Omega. I'll give you that. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to give you a choice. Back down. Acknowledge the attack was a mistake, and we both walk away before this gets uglier. And if I don't? Then we find out if your warriors are as good as you think they are. It was a bluff, a massive, desperate bluff, but Leora kept her expression calm, her shoulders square. Kale studied her. Then he looked at the cubs. His eyes lingered on Ash, small, limping, but standing firm, and something in his expression shifted. A demonstration, Kyle said finally. Your cubs against my best warriors, non-lethal. If your methods are so superior, prove it. If you win, I'll consider your terms. If you lose, he smiled. Well, we'll discuss compensation. Leora's heart was pounding, but she nodded. Agreed. The demonstration was held in an outdoor arena, smaller than Blackridge's, but just as brutal. Thornback warriors filled the stands, shouting and jeering. Kale sat at the center, watching with cold amusement. 3 of Thornback's best entered the arena. All adults, all veterans. The cubs walked out to meet them. Garen led, his gold eyes locked on the largest warrior. The twins flanked. Sable circled, and Ash hung back, watching, calculating. The fight started fast. The Thornback warriors were good, coordinated, experienced, vicious. They came at the cubs with everything they had, but the cubs were better. Garen met the first warrior head-on, matching strength with strength but adding speed the warrior didn't expect. The twins worked in perfect tandem, one distracting while the other struck from angles that left their opponent reeling. Sable was everywhere and nowhere, landing hits that came from shadows. And Ash called the shots. His voice cut through the chaos, directing the others with precision. When Garen got pinned, Ash redirected the twins to create an opening. When Sable was cornered, Ash sent Garen crashing through the warrior's defense. Every move was calculated. Every command was exactly what was needed. Within minutes, all 3 Thornback warriors were down. The arena went silent. Kale stood slowly. He walked down to the arena floor and approached Ash. The small white cub didn't back down, just met his eyes with calm defiance. How old is he? Kyle asked. Barely 6 months, Leora said. Kale stared at Ash for a long moment. Then he looked at Leora. Your terms. What are they? Peace. Real peace. Not just an end to hostilities, but cooperation, trade, communication. Proof that packs can be strong without tearing each other apart. And if I refuse, then this gets ugly, and we both lose. Kyle was quiet. The crowd waited. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then Kyle extended his hand. You've got a deal, Omega. Leora shook it, her hand tiny in his, and tried not to show how badly she was shaking. They returned to Blackridge 3 days later. The news had traveled ahead of them. Kara had sent a rider the moment the deal was struck. By the time they crossed the border, half the pack was waiting. Ronan stood at the front, his expression unreadable. Leora dismounted and walked forward, the cubs at her heels. It's done, she said simply. Thornback agreed to peace terms. No more attacks. Open trade negotiations start next month. The crowd erupted. Ronan's expression finally cracked. Not quite a smile, but something close. How? I asked them if they wanted to evolve or die. Turns out most people prefer the first option. And the demonstration? The cubs handled it. She looked back at them, exhausted, battered, but standing tall. They always do. Ronan nodded slowly. Then he turned to the crowd. Council vote tonight on whether Lyora Vale's methods become official Blackridge policy. Tarek stepped forward, his face red. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. She did what you said was impossible. She went into hostile territory, faced down a rival alpha, and came back with a peace treaty instead of a body count. Ronan's voice was steel. That deserves recognition. The vote was held that night. It wasn't unanimous. Tarek voted against, along with 2 others. But 9 voted in favor. Lyora's methods became official policy. And everything changed. 6 months later, the nursery had expanded into an entire wing of the compound. 50 cubs now. From a dozen different packs, alphas, betas, omegas, all of them learning the same lessons, strength balanced with strategy, dominance tempered with empathy, survival built on trust. Garen had grown into a leader the entire pack respected. The twins ran training exercises with a precision that made veteran warriors nod in approval. Sable had become Ronan's personal scout. And Ash had become Lyora's second. Still small, still limping, but commanding a room with nothing but his voice and the intelligence behind those pale eyes. Other territories started sending representatives, asking questions, requesting demonstrations. The old ways hadn't disappeared. They never would. But they were changing, evolving. And at the center of it all was an Omega who'd walked into an iron-walled arena with nothing but instinct and defiance. Lyora stood in the nursery one evening watching the cubs, her cubs, work through a coordination exercise. Kara stood beside her, arms crossed, a rare smile on her face. You did it, Kara said quietly. They did it, Lyora corrected. Same thing. Maybe it was. Ronan appeared in the doorway and the cubs immediately stopped to acknowledge him. He nodded back, respect earned, not demanded, and walked over to Lyora. The Eastern Territories want to send a delegation, he said. They've heard about what you're doing, want to see if it can work for them. And what did you tell them? That they'd have to ask you. Lyora looked at him in surprise. His expression was serious. You're not just a handler anymore. You're building something bigger than one pack, bigger than Blackridge. The North is watching, and they're ready to listen. She looked back at the cubs, at Ash directing the others with quiet confidence, at Garen protecting the smaller ones without even thinking about it, at all of them, thriving in ways no one had thought possible. Then I guess we'd better give them something worth listening to, she said. That night, Lyora stood on the walls of Blackridge and looked out over the Northern Territories, the same territories that had seemed so hostile, so impossible, when she'd first arrived. She thought about this woman who'd crossed the border with nothing, who'd been given a test designed to kill her, who'd knelt in an arena full of predators and smiled when she should have run. That woman had been terrified. This woman, the one standing here now, was still terrified. But she was also something else. She was needed, and maybe that was enough. Behind her, she heard the soft pad of feet. Ash appeared at her side, his white fur catching the moonlight, his pale eyes reflecting stars. He sat. Just sat, the way he always did when she needed him to. We did it, she whispered. His tail thumped once against the stone. Not an ending, just a beginning. But for the first time in her life, Lyora thought maybe beginnings were enough. Maybe you didn't need to know how the story ended. You just needed to trust that you could handle whatever came next. The wind howled through Blackridge, still wild, still fierce, still dangerous. But now it felt like home. And in the nursery below, 50 cubs slept fitfully, dreaming of teeth and stone and a woman who'd answered fangs with courage, chaos with a fearless smile, and an entire system with nothing but the audacity to believe things could be different. They were different now, and the North would never be the same. As many as it takes, she said, and for the first time since arriving in Blackridge, she believed it. The belief lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning after the gathering, Lyora woke to find the nursery surrounded by guards. Not the usual 2 stationed at the door. 20. Armed, their faces grim, hands resting on weapon hilts like they expected violence. She was on her feet instantly, her heart already racing. The cubs sensed it. Garen's head snapped up, his gold eyes scanning for threats. The twins scrambled to their feet, their bodies tense. Sable melted into the shadows near the far wall, and Ash positioned himself behind her legs despite his injury, his small body trembling but his stance defiant. Kara pushed through the guards, her expression dark as a storm cloud. "Get dressed. Ronan wants you in the war room. Now." "What happened?" "Border attack, Eastern Ridge. 3 dead, 7 injured." Kara's voice was clipped, professional, but Leora could hear the anger underneath. "They're saying it's connected to you." Leora's stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I haven't even left the compound in weeks." "Tell that to the council. Move." She pulled on her coat with shaking hands and followed Kara through corridors that felt suddenly hostile. Pack members she'd started to recognize, people who'd nodded at her in passing, who'd brought their cubs to train, who'd asked her advice on handling difficult youngsters, now turned away or stared with open suspicion. Some whispered as she passed. Others just glared. The war room was chaos when she entered. Maps covered every surface, some weighted down with stones, others curling at the edges. Council members shouted over each other, their voices echoing off stone walls. Markers had been scattered across one map showing the eastern border, red stains marking where the attack had happened. And at the center of it all stood Ronan, his face carved from stone, and Tarek, looking like he'd won something precious. "There she is," Tarek said, his voice dripping with false civility. "The architect of our destruction." "Enough," Ronan said, but his eyes on Leora were cold, assessing, like he was seeing her for the first time and reconsidering everything. "What's going on?" Leora demanded. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Marin stepped forward, a rolled parchment in her hand. Her silver hair was pulled back tighter than usual, her expression grim. "This arrived with the bodies." She unrolled it on the table, pushing aside other documents. The message was short, written in blood that had dried to a rust-brown color. "Your weakness invited this. More will die until strength returns to Blackridge." It was signed with the mark of the Thornback Pack, a rival territory to the east that had been pushing at Blackridge's borders for years. A stylized thorn wrapped around a broken blade. "They're using the gathering as proof," Marin said quietly. "Proof that Blackridge has gone soft, that showing diplomacy instead of dominance makes us a target." "That's not—" Leora started. "Isn't it?" Tarek cut in, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the markers jump. "We parade cubs in front of the North. Show them playing nice, using words instead of claws, demonstrating strategy over strength. And 3 days later, Thornback attacks because they think we won't fight back, because they think we've forgotten how." "We will fight back," Ronan said, his voice hard as the stone beneath their feet. "Of course we will, but the damage is done." Tarek turned to the council, gesturing broadly. "Every pack leader at that gathering saw what we've become, saw us elevating an Omega, saw us teaching royal cubs to negotiate instead of dominate, and now they're testing us. Thornback is just the first. Mark my words, within a month, every rival pack will be pushing at our borders, seeing how far they can go before we break." "You don't know that," Leora said. "I know that we haven't been attacked on our own territory in 15 years, and I know it started the moment you walked into this pack." Tarek's eyes were hard, triumphant. "Your methods might work in a nursery, but out here, in the real world, they get people killed." The room erupted in argument. Voices overlapped, some shouting agreement, others pushing back, a few trying to be heard over the chaos. Someone threw a marker across the room. Another council member stood so fast his chair toppled backward. Leora stood frozen, the words hitting like physical blows. She'd known resistance would come, had expected it, had prepared for arguments and pushback and the slow, grinding work of changing minds. But this, people dying, attacks happening, all of it tied to her like she'd personally opened the gates and invited the enemy in. "Quiet!" Ronan's voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. Everyone fell silent. He looked at Leora, and for the first time since she'd known him, she couldn't read his expression. "You have a choice. Step down voluntarily, leave Blackridge. We'll say you went back to wherever you came from, and maybe that's enough to satisfy the other packs. Maybe they'll see it as us correcting course, getting back to traditional ways, or, she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Or you prove Tarek wrong. Prove that what you've built isn't weakness. His gray eyes were unreadable, cold as winter sky. Thornback wants a response. I'm sending a delegation to their territory to negotiate terms or deliver consequences depending on how it goes. You're going with them. The room exploded again. That's insane, someone shouted. She's not a warrior. Sending an Omega into Thornback territory is suicide. You might as well cut her throat here and save them the trouble. I said quiet. Ronan didn't raise his voice, but everyone shut up instantly. The weight of his authority filled the room like a physical presence. He kept his eyes on Leora. You wanted to change how we do things. This is your chance. Go to Thornback. Use those methods you're so confident in. Show them that strength and strategy can coexist. If you can resolve this without bloodshed, you prove your point. The Council will have to acknowledge that your way works. If you can't, and... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Leora's mind raced. Thornback was notorious, brutal, aggressive, led by an alpha named Kale, who'd built his reputation on crushing anyone who showed weakness. He'd killed 3 rival alphas in dominance challenges over the past decade. His territory was a fortress. His warriors were fanatics, and his patience for diplomacy was measured in seconds before violence erupted. Going there as an Omega, as an outsider, as the living symbol of everything they despised, it was a death sentence, unless it wasn't. I'll go, she said. Tarek laughed, a harsh barking sound. You'll be dead within an hour of crossing their border. Maybe. But if I am, at least you'll have someone to blame that isn't yourself. She looked at Ronan. I'll need the cubs. The room went dead silent. Every eye turned to her like she'd just suggested burning down the compound. Absolutely not, Marin said, her voice sharp. They're too young. They're the proof, Leora interrupted. You want me to show Thornback that strength and strategy can coexist? That balance works? That there's a way forward that doesn't involve endless bloodshed? I can't do that by myself. I'm just an Omega with ideas. But the cubs, they're living evidence of what I'm talking about. They survived a rite designed to kill them. They demonstrated at the gathering. They're respected by pack leaders across the north. If anyone can make Thornback listen, it's them. You're asking me to send royal heirs into hostile territory, Ronan said slowly, each word deliberate. I'm asking you to let them do what they were trained to do. Survive, adapt, lead. She took a breath, steadying herself. And I'm asking you to trust me one more time. The silence stretched. Leora could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every eye in the room. Then Ronan nodded once. You leave at dawn. Take Kara and 4 guards. If anything happens to those cubs, it won't. It better not. His expression was hard as iron. No warmth, no encouragement, just threat. Because if it does, there won't be anywhere far enough for you to run. I'll hunt you to the edge of the world and beyond. Leora spent the rest of the day preparing. The cubs knew something was wrong. They circled her constantly, restless and anxious, picking up on her tension the way they always did. When she finally sat them down in the corner of the nursery and explained what was happening, Garen's response was immediate. A low growl that said he was ready to fight, ready to tear through whatever threat was coming. No fighting, Leora said firmly, placing her hand on his head. Not unless there's no other choice. We're going into their territory, their rules, their ground. We show respect, we show strength, but we don't start a war. And if they start one? Kara asked from the doorway. She'd been listening, arms crossed, her scarred face skeptical. Then we finish it. Leora looked at each cub in turn. But only if we have to, understood? Garen huffed but sat, his muscles still coiled tight. The twins nodded, though Dace looked nervous and Torin kept glancing at the door like he expected enemies to pour through any second. Sable was already gone, probably scouting, gathering information the way he always did when things got tense. And Ash limped over and pressed his nose against her hand. His pale eyes met hers, and she saw something in them that made her chest tight. Trust. Complete, unquestioning trust. I know you're scared, she said quietly, just to him. I am too. But we're in this together, all of us. We've survived everything else. We'll survive this. His tail twitched. Not quite a wag, but close. That night, Leora couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot in the small room they'd given her months ago, bigger now, with actual furniture, a sign of her rising status, and stared at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blood-written message, saw the bodies that had come with it, saw herself walking into Thornback territory and never walking out. Around midnight, she gave up and went back to the nursery. All 5 cubs were awake, waiting. She sat with them in the darkness, and they arranged themselves around her. Garen pressed against her left side. The twins sprawled across her legs. Sable perched on a shelf above keeping watch, and Ash curled in her lap. "Tomorrow's going to be hard," she whispered. "Harder than the right, harder than anything we've faced. But we're not alone. We have each other." Garen's rumble vibrated through her ribs. "I know, I'm scared too." They stayed like that until dawn. They left as the sun broke over the eastern ridge. 6 guards, not 4. Ronan had insisted on the extra protection. Kara led the group, her hand never far from her blade, her eyes constantly scanning. The cubs traveled in formation, with Garen at point, the twins flanking, Sable ranging wide in the trees, and Ash staying close to Leora despite his uneven gait. The journey to Thornback territory took 2 days. 2 days of hostile terrain, steep ridges that made Ash struggle, dense forest where anything could be hiding, cold that bit through every layer of clothing despite it being late spring. 2 days of watching the guards get more nervous the closer they got, their conversations dropping to whispers, their movements becoming jerky with tension. 2 days of Leora second-guessing every decision that had led her here. What if she was wrong? What if her methods only worked in controlled environments? What if walking into Thornback was exactly the stupid, arrogant mistake Tarek said it was? They crossed the border at midday on the second day. The Thornback patrol was waiting for them. 12 warriors, all of them massive, all of them armed with weapons that looked well used. Their leader was a woman with a scar that split her face from forehead to jaw, turning her smile into something grotesque. Her eyes were like chips of flint, hard, sharp, unforgiving. "You're the Omega," she said. Not a question. Statement of fact. "I'm Leora Vale. I'm here to speak with Kyle." The woman's smile widened, showing teeth. "He's expecting you. Didn't think you'd be stupid enough to actually show up. Most people have better survival instincts." "Here I am." "So you are." The woman's eyes drifted to the cubs, lingering on each one with an expression that made Leora's skin crawl. "And you brought pets. How cute." Garen growled. The woman laughed. "Oh, this one has spirit, shame. He'll probably die first." "Touch him and find out," Leora said quietly. The woman's smile vanished. She stepped closer, and Leora forced herself not to step back. Up close, the woman smelled like blood and smoke and something feral. "You've got guts, Omega. Won't save you, but it's entertaining." She turned to her patrol. "Surround them. Any of the Black Ridge dogs tries anything, kill them, but keep the Omega and cubs alive. Kyle wants to see them himself." The patrol moved in with practiced efficiency, forming a tight circle around Leora's group. The guards from Black Ridge stayed close, hands on weapons, but Leora could see the fear in their eyes. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1, on hostile ground with no backup coming. They marched deeper into Thornback territory. The landscape changed, more barren, more rocky, less forgiving. The Thornback compound was built into the side of a mountain, all stone and timber and defensive positions that could hold off an army. Warriors watched from every vantage point, their eyes tracking the group's progress. The air smelled like smoke and blood, and something wild that made Leora's instincts scream danger. They were taken to the central hall. It was massive, bigger than Blackridge's war room, with a ceiling that stretched up into shadows. Trophies lined the walls, weapons, furs, skulls from kills that Leora didn't want to identify. Warriors filled the space, dozens of them, all watching with predatory interest. Kyle was waiting. He sat in a chair that was more throne than furniture, carved from dark wood and decorated with what looked like claw marks. He was everything the stories said. Huge, easily 7 feet tall with shoulders like a bear. Scars covered his exposed arms and neck, the kind you got from surviving things that should have killed you. His eyes were pale yellow, almost colorless, And when they focused on Leora, she felt like prey being evaluated by a predator deciding whether the hunt was worth the effort. "So," Kael said, his voice like gravel grinding against stone, "Blackridge sends me an Omega and some cubs. Should I be insulted or amused?" "Neither," Leora said. She kept her voice steady, her posture straight, despite every instinct screaming at her to make herself smaller. "I'm here to talk about the attack." "What's there to talk about?" Kael leaned back in his throne, utterly relaxed. "You're weak. We took advantage. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked." "And when Blackridge retaliates? Sends their full force to your borders? Burns this place to the ground and salts the earth behind them? Is that how it works too?" The hall went quiet. Kael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes. "You threatening me, Omega? I'm asking you a question. You started this because you think we're weak. Fine. Prove it. Send more attacks. Kill more people. But know that proving it means war. Real war. Not border skirmishes or messages written in blood. Full conflict that'll cost both our packs more than either of us can afford. Is that what you want?" "We can afford it." "Can you?" Leora took a step forward, ignoring the way the guards around her tensed. "Because from where I'm standing, you just picked a fight with the strongest territory in the north. Blackridge has more warriors, better defenses, and alliances with half the packs in the region. You might win the first few battles, might even take some territory. But eventually you'll lose. And when you do, Thornback becomes a memory and everyone who followed you into this stupid war dies for nothing. Over what? Pride? Fear that maybe strength looks different than you thought?" "Careful," Kael said, his voice dropping dangerously low. Several warriors around the hall shifted, hands moving toward weapons. "I'm being realistic. You want to test Blackridge? Fine. Test us." She gestured to the cubs. "These 5 survived a rite designed to kill them, fought a feral, and won. And they did it by working together. By being smart instead of just strong. By understanding that real power isn't about who can hit hardest. It's about who can adapt fastest. That's not weakness. That's evolution." Kael leaned forward, his massive hands gripping the arms of his throne. "Pretty speech. Doesn't change the fact that you're standing in my hall, unarmed, surrounded by warriors who could tear you apart before your guards took a breath. What's stopping me from doing exactly that? From making an example of you that'll echo across the north?" "Nothing," Leora said, "except the fact that killing me proves my point. That you're so terrified of change, so locked into old patterns, that the only answer you have to a new idea is violence. And that tells every pack watching this that Thornback's strong but stupid, powerful but predictable. Exactly the kind of enemy that smart packs can outmaneuver and destroy." The hall went silent again. You could have heard a pin drop. Kael stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the stone walls. "You've got guts, Omega, I'll give you that. More guts than brains, but still. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to give you a choice. Back down. Acknowledge the attack was a mistake made from bad intelligence. And we both walk away before this gets uglier and costs both our packs blood we can't afford to lose. And if I don't, then we find out if your warriors are as good as you think they are. If your defenses can hold against everything Blackridge can bring. If you're ready to gamble everything you've built on pride and tradition." She held his gaze. "Your choice." It was a bluff. A massive, desperate bluff, built on nothing but confidence she didn't feel. But Leora kept her expression calm, her shoulders square, her voice steady. Kael studied her. Then he looked at the cubs. His eyes lingered on Ash, small, limping, but standing firm beside Leora, with his head up and his pale eyes defiant. Something in Kael's expression shifted. "A demonstration," he said finally. "Your cubs against my best warriors. Non-lethal. If your methods are so superior, if this new way of doing things actually works, prove it. Right here. Right now. If you win, I'll consider your terms. If you lose—" He smiled, and it was not kind. "Well, we'll discuss compensation for the insult of you wasting my time." Leora's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it, but she nodded. "Agreed." "What?" The demonstration was held in an outdoor arena carved into the mountainside, smaller than Blackridge's, but just as brutal. Stone walls rose 20 feet high. The ground was packed dirt stained with old blood. Thornback warriors filled the stands, shouting and jeering, their voices echoing off the rocks. Kale sat at the center, flanked by his council, watching with cold amusement. 3 of Thornback's best entered the arena, all adults, all veterans with scars that told stories of survival. The first was the woman with the split face who'd met them at the border. The second was a massive man who looked like he could break stone with his bare hands. The third moved like liquid shadow, fast, silent, deadly. The cubs walked out to meet them. Garen led, his gold eyes locked on the largest warrior, his body tense and ready. The twins flanked him, moving in perfect synchronization. Sable circled wide, already disappearing into the sparse shadows at the arena's edge. And Ash hung back, watching, his pale eyes tracking every movement, calculating angles and opportunities. Leora stood at the arena's edge, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood through the bandages. Kara was beside her, pale and tense. "They're going to kill them," Kara whispered. "No," Leora said. "They're not." She had to believe it. The fight started fast. The scarred woman lunged at Garen with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone her size. Garen met her head-on, their bodies colliding with a sound like thunder. She was bigger, heavier, more experienced, but Garen was faster. He twisted at the last second, redirecting her momentum, and she stumbled past him. The massive warrior went for the twins. Dace and Torin scattered, circling him from opposite sides. He swung at Dace, a blow that would have broken bones if it connected, but Dace wasn't there anymore. Torin struck from behind, claws raking across the warrior's calf. Not deep, just enough to draw blood and shift his attention. The Shadow Warrior found Sable, or tried to. Sable was everywhere and nowhere, moving through the limited cover with an efficiency that made even the Thornback warriors in the stands go quiet. Every time the Shadow Warrior thought he had him, Sable was already gone, already striking from a new angle. And Ash called the shots. His voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. A sound that Leora had taught him, a specific pitch that the others had learned to respond to instantly. "Garen, left!" Garen pivoted, avoiding a strike from the scarred woman that would have taken him down. "Twins, switch!" Dace and Torin reversed positions mid-stride, confusing the massive warrior who'd been tracking their pattern. "Sable, high!" Sable launched himself from a slight rise in the arena floor, coming down on the Shadow Warrior's shoulders and driving him to the ground. Every move was calculated. Every command was exactly what was needed. The Thornback warriors were good, coordinated, experienced, vicious. They came at the cubs with everything they had, holding nothing back despite the non-lethal designation. But the cubs were better. They moved like water, flowing around obstacles, reforming after every impact. When Garen got pinned by the scarred woman, Ash redirected the twins to create an opening. When Sable was cornered by the Shadow Warrior, Ash sent Garen crashing through the warrior's defense from an unexpected angle. When the massive warrior tried to grab one of the twins, both cubs moved in perfect synchronization to avoid the grab and counterstrike his exposed ribs. It wasn't perfect. Garen took a hit that made him yelp. One of the twins, Torin, got his ear torn, blood spattering the arena floor. Sable's left front paw was scraped raw, but they didn't stop. They adapted, learned, overcame. Within minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10, time lost all meaning. All 3 Thornback warriors were down. Not dead, not even seriously injured, just down, beaten by cubs a quarter their size and a tenth their experience. The arena went silent, completely, utterly silent. Kyle stood slowly, his massive frame unfolding from his throne. He walked down to the arena floor with deliberate steps, each footfall echoing. He approached Ash, who stood at the center of the group, blood on his white fur from where he'd taken a glancing blow, but his head still up, his eyes still clear. "How old is he?" Kale asked, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "Barely 6 months," Leora said. Kale stared at Ash for a long moment. The small white cub didn't back down, didn't show submission, just met his gaze with calm defiance. Then Kyle looked at Leora. "Your terms. What are they?" "Peace. Real peace. Not just an end to hostilities, but cooperation. Trade routes, communication channels. Proof that packs can be strong without tearing each other apart every generation. And if I refuse, then this gets ugly, and we both lose. Your warriors are good, but you just saw what cubs can do with the right training. Imagine what Blackridge's full force looks like. Then imagine paying that price, watching your people die, your territory burn, all because you couldn't let go of the idea that the only way to be strong is to be cruel. Kael was quiet. The crowd waited, hundreds of warriors holding their breath. Then Kael extended his hand. "You've got a deal, Omega." Leora shook it, her hand tiny in his massive palm, and tried not to show how badly she was shaking. The arena erupted. Not in anger, in acknowledgement, grudging respect from warriors who'd just watched 5 cubs do what shouldn't have been possible. They returned to Blackridge 3 days later. The news had traveled ahead of them. Kara had sent a rider the moment the deal was struck, carrying a sealed message from Kael himself confirming the peace terms. By the time Leora's group crossed the border back into Blackridge territory, half the pack was waiting. Ronan stood at the front, his expression unreadable, flanked by the council. Leora dismounted, her body aching from 3 days of hard travel. The cubs filed out behind her, exhausted, battered, bandaged, but walking tall. Garen limped slightly from a bruised shoulder. Torn's ear was wrapped. Sable's paw had been treated but was still tender. Even Ash looked ready to collapse. But they stood together, united. Leora walked forward, the cubs at her heels. "It's done," she said simply. Thornback agreed to peace terms. No more attacks. Open trade negotiations start next month. Kael gave his word in front of his entire pack. The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts. Ronan's expression finally cracked. Not quite a smile, but something close. Relief, maybe, or respect. "How?" "I asked them if they wanted to evolve or die. Turns out most people prefer the first option when you give them a real choice." "And the demonstration?" "The cubs handled it." She looked back at them, exhausted, battered, but standing tall and proud. "They always do." Ronan nodded slowly. Then he turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying across the valley. "Council vote, tonight, emergency session, on whether Leora Vale's methods become official Blackridge policy." Tarek stepped forward, his face red with fury and something that looked like desperation. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." Ronan's voice was steel. "She did what you said was impossible, what you said would get everyone killed. She went into hostile territory unarmed, faced down a rival alpha known for brutality, and came back with a peace treaty instead of a body count. That deserves recognition. It deserves scrutiny. One success doesn't—" "It's not one success." Marin's voice cut through Tarek's protest. "The cubs passed the right. They demonstrated at the gathering. They just brokered peace with Thornback. That's 3 impossible things before most handlers achieve one. The methods work." The vote was held that night in the council chamber. The entire pack crowded in to watch. Warriors, handlers, families, everyone who'd been touched by what was happening. Leora stood at the center, the cubs arranged around her, and waited. "All in favor of making Leora Vale's methods official Blackridge policy," Ronan said. "Raise your hand." It wasn't unanimous. Tarek voted against, his hand firmly down, his expression bitter. 2 others joined him, traditionalists who couldn't let go of the old ways. But 9 hands went up, including Marin's, including counselors who'd been skeptical from the start. 9-3. "Motion passes," Ronan said. "Leora Vale's methods are now official policy. Any handler working with Blackridge cubs will be trained in her techniques. Any dispute about approach goes through her first." Tarek stood abruptly and walked out. Nobody stopped him. Leora felt something in her chest release, a tension she'd been carrying since the moment she'd walked into the arena all those months ago. It wasn't victory. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like finally being able to breathe. 6 months later, the nursery had expanded into an entire wing of the compound. 50 cubs now, from a dozen different packs, alphas, betas, omegas, all of them learning the same lessons: strength balanced with strategy, dominance tempered with empathy, survival built on trust instead of fear. Garen had grown into a leader the entire pack respected. He ran training exercises with confidence and fairness, pushing the younger cubs but never breaking them. The twins had developed a teaching style all their own, patient, creative, always finding new ways to help struggling cubs understand. Sable had become Ronan's personal scout, his ability to move unseen making him invaluable. And Ash had become Leora's second, Still small, still limping, but commanding rooms with nothing but his voice and the sharp intelligence behind those pale eyes. When disputes arose between cubs, they brought them to Ash. When strategies needed developing, Ash was consulted. When Leora needed someone to handle a situation she couldn't be in two places for, Ash stepped up. Other territories started sending representatives. First one, then three. Then delegations from across the north, all asking the same questions. How did you do it? Can it work for us? Will you teach our handlers? Leora said yes to all of them. The old ways hadn't disappeared. They never would. There were still packs that ruled through fear, still alphas who believed dominance was the only language worth speaking. But they were changing, evolving. The North was watching what happened in Blackridge and reconsidering assumptions that had held for generations. Leora stood in the nursery one evening watching the cubs, her cubs, though they belonged to themselves now, work through a coordination exercise. A group of young alphas were learning to work with omega cubs half their size, learning that strength came in different forms. Kara stood beside her, arms crossed, a rare smile on her scarred face. You did it, Kara said quietly. They did it, Leora corrected, gesturing to the cubs. Same thing. Maybe it was. Maybe that was the point. That individual success meant nothing if it didn't lift everyone around you. Ronan appeared in the doorway and the cubs immediately stopped to acknowledge him. Not in fear, in respect. He nodded back, the kind of acknowledgement earned through trust, not demanded through dominance, and walked over to Leora. The Eastern Territories want to send a delegation, he said, without preamble. They've heard about what you're doing here. Want to see if it can work for them too. And what did you tell them? That they'd have to ask you. You're not my subordinate anymore. You're... He paused, searching for the word. A partner. In this. In rebuilding what the North can be. Leora looked at him in surprise. In all the months she'd been here, Ronan had never used that word. Never suggested she was anything but a useful tool in his arsenal. His expression was serious. You're not just a handler anymore. You're building something bigger than one pack. Bigger than Blackridge. The North is watching, and they're ready to listen if you're ready to teach. She looked back at the cubs. At Ash directing younger ones with quiet confidence. At Garen protecting smaller cubs without even thinking about it, his protective instincts channeled into something constructive instead of destructive. At all of them, thriving in ways no one had thought possible. Then I guess we'd better give them something worth listening to, she said. That night, Leora stood on the walls of Blackridge and looked out over the northern territories. The same territories that had seemed so hostile, so impossible, so utterly foreign when she'd first arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a burn scar she never talked about. She thought about the woman who'd crossed that border, who'd been given a test designed to kill her, who'd knelt in an arena full of predators and smiled when she should have run. That woman had been terrified. This woman, the one standing here now with wind whipping her hair and cold biting through her coat, was still terrified. But she was also something else. She was needed, and maybe, finally, that was enough. Behind her she heard the soft pad of feet. Ash appeared at her side, his white fur catching the moonlight, making him look like a ghost. His pale eyes reflected stars as he looked up at her. He sat. Just sat. The way he always did when she needed him to. We did it, she whispered. His tail thumped once against the stone. Agreement, or maybe just acknowledgement that they'd survived another day. Not an ending, just a beginning. But for the first time in her life, Leora thought maybe beginnings were enough. Maybe you didn't need to know how the story ended. You just needed to trust that you could handle whatever came next. That the people around you, the cubs, the allies, the pack you'd built from nothing, would be there when things got hard again. Because they would get hard. This wasn't a fairy tale with neat resolutions. Tarek was still out there, still bitter, still looking for ways to undermine everything she'd built. Other packs would test them. The old ways would push back against the new. There would be failures and setbacks and moments when everything felt like it was collapsing. But that was okay, because they'd handle it the same way they'd handled everything else. Together. The wind howled through Blackridge, still wild, still fierce, still dangerous, but now it felt like home. And in the nursery below, 50 cubs slept fitfully, dreaming of teeth and stone, and a woman who'd answered fangs with courage, chaos with a fearless smile, and an entire system with nothing but the audacity to believe things could be different. They were different now, and the North would never be the same.